The first time I read Anansi's Goatman story, it scared the living daylights out of me. I didn't know about the Goatman legend before that, but that creature became a monster that challenged skinwalkers for scariest mimic of all time. I didn't know I'd ever find another Goatman story to disturb me like that, until someone sent me this. This story is called I Watched the Goatman Kill My Friend, from Burlig Factory, and I dare you to go camping after listening to this. I decided to write this story because of some news I recently heard. A few hikers went missing near the Patuxent Research Refuge. Officially, they're saying it's the terrain, the weather, people getting lost like they often do. But I think it's something else. I know because I was there 7 years ago in those same woods, and I saw what they won't find in any search grid. I live in Oregon now. I haven't been back to Maryland since that weekend, and I haven't spoken to most of the people who were with me. We made an agreement, the 5 of us, that we wouldn't bring it up, that we'd get on with our lives and pretend it was nothing more than panic and exhaustion, tired, scared minds playing tricks on us in the dark. But at the time of writing this, people are missing out there, and I don't want to keep quiet anymore. It was October 2018, early in the month, before the leaves had really turned. I was 24 years old, working a nothing job in Silver Spring, living in a shared house with too many people. My friend Gabe had been planning a trip for a while. He was big into urban exploration then, always dragging us out to abandoned hospitals or closed down malls. But this time, he'd found something special, he said. Old infrastructure around the Governor's Bridge area, near the research refuge. Buildings that had been left to rot when they reallocated funding in the 90s. There were 5 of us going. Gabe and I had known each other since high school, the planner type. He always brought maps and backup plans for these kinds of trips. Christian came because he wanted photographs for some portfolio he was building. He was a skeptical guy and did not believe in anything that he couldn't document, which should tell you something about what happened later. Terry was the one who kept everyone's spirits up. He told stories and jokes in equal rates. And Matthew, who I didn't know very well then, but who turned out to be the most sensible among us. A quiet guy. Competent, though. The plan was simple. Friday evening, drive out, camp somewhere in the woods near the refuge boundary, spend Saturday exploring the abandoned sites, then pack up Sunday morning. We found a spot off an old road, maybe a quarter-mile hike in. It was isolated, but not in a dangerous way. We could hear the occasional car in the far distance. Setting up camp took an hour. Gabe had insisted on proper gear, good tents, a decent cooking setup. By the time we had everything ready, it was fully dark. We built a fire and cooked some sausages, and we drank beer. It all felt exactly like it was supposed to feel. Like freedom, like we were getting away. It was Terry who brought up the Goatman. "You know, we're in Goatman territory," he said, poking at the fire with a long stick. He had that grin he always got when he was about to wind someone up. Christian groaned. "Not this again." "What's the Goatman?" Matthew asked. "A local legend," Christian said, before Terry could answer. "Creepypasta before creepypasta existed. Some guy with an axe who supposedly attacks teenagers in cars." "It's more than that," Terry said. He was enjoying this. "It's from the 70s, around Beltsville mostly. Some kids parking on Lover's Lane hear this sound, like metal dragging on the road. Then something hits the car. They drive off, screaming, and when they get to a gas station, they find axe marks in the roof. Deep ones. And hair, too. Thick, brown hair. Goat hair. Bull crap, Christian said. Probably, Terry agreed. But there's a lot of stories from around here. Things people saw near the Agricultural Research Center. Some folks said it was an experiment gone wrong. Half man, half goat. Others said it was older than that. Something that lived in these woods before there were any research centers at all. And now it wanders around with an axe attacking horny teenagers, Christian said. Very plausible. We laughed. Even Matthew laughed. It was the right kind of story for a night in the woods. Scary enough to give you a little thrill. Stupid enough that you didn't actually believe it. The fire burned low. We talked about other things. And then around midnight, we turned in. I remember that first night because of how normal it was. I slept fine. If I heard anything unusual, I just don't recall it. The woods were dense and the sounds carried in a weird way. Sometimes you'd hear something that seemed very close that was probably half a mile away. But that's just how the woods are. That's just darkness and your ears adjusting. Saturday morning was clear and cold. We had coffee and instant porridge. Then we broke camp partially. We left the tents up, but secured everything else. Then we headed out to explore. The old sites were better than we'd hoped. There were these concrete bridge supports covered in graffiti, and a crumbling park service building with the roof collapsed in. There were equipment sheds with rusted machinery still inside. Christian was happy, taking photos of everything. We climbed things we probably shouldn't have climbed, and explored buildings we probably shouldn't have entered. It was exactly what we wanted, and why we came out here in the first place. By late afternoon, we were hiking back towards camp, following this trail along the refuge boundary. That's when Christian spotted it. A building set back from the path, barely visible through overgrowth. An old research station, he thought. He wanted to photograph it before we lost the light. We should head back, Gabe said, checking his phone. It'll be dark in 40 minutes. 20 minutes, Christian said. Just let me get some shots. This is perfect. We debated it. In the end, we went. It was close enough, we thought. We could make it. The station was half collapsed, concrete walls thick with ivy and moss. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, though it couldn't have been. The refuge had only been established in the 30s, and this building looked more modern than that. 2 stories, or what remained of them. Windows like empty eye sockets. Great light, Christian said, already framing shots. We poked around while he worked. The building was more intact than it looked from outside. You could still get into some of the ground floor rooms, though the upper level was basically gone. There was debris everywhere, broken glass, chunks of concrete, water damage, animal droppings. Matthew was the one who mentioned the smell. Something died in here, he said. He was standing near a doorway that led deeper into the building. It smells wrong. He was right. It was that wet fur smell, thick and organic, mixed with something sharper. I didn't want to go closer, but Christian did, camera raised. Jesus, he said, and stopped. We crowded behind him. The room beyond the doorway was larger than the others. Might have been a laboratory once, and there was evidence someone had been living there, or something had. Not a homeless camp, it wasn't that. There were no sleeping bags or discarded food containers, no needles or bottles. What there was, though, there were bones. Animal bones. Too big for rats, but too small for deer. They almost looked arranged somehow, though I couldn't tell you the pattern. They were piled in corners, broken open for the marrow, and hair, clumps of it, matted and dark, stuck to the walls and scattered across the floor. The walls themselves had marks in them, deep scratches in the concrete, gouged out like something had been sharpening claws. We should go," Matthew said. Christian was still taking photos, but his hands weren't as steady as they were before. "We should go right now," Matthew said again. That's when I noticed how dark it was getting. The light had that golden going gray quality that means you've got about 15 minutes before you're in real twilight. We'd been there longer than we should have been. We left in a hurry. Christian took a last few shots of the exterior, and then we were walking fast back along the trail, nobody doing much talking. The woods were getting that pressed-in feeling they get at dusk, when all the space between the trees seems to shrink. Everything felt closer than it was before. Terry made a joke about us running away from nothing, but it fell flat, and we walked faster. I started to feel something then, like I was being watched. A sense that something was very wrong, that you can't name, but your body understands perfectly well. I kept wanting to look behind me, but I didn't. None of us did. I think because we all sensed that if we looked back, we might see something we didn't want to see. We made it to camp just as the light was going. Everything was fine. Our tents were untouched, our gear exactly as we left it. We got the fire going and cooked dinner, and the relief we felt was immense. We'd spooked ourselves, that was all. Old buildings in the woods at twilight, our imaginations running wild. We laughed about it, and Terry started telling jokes again. But that smell came back after full dark. Matthew was the first to notice. He went still with his fork halfway to his mouth, just listening. And then he sniffed. "Do you smell that?" We did. It was the same smell from the station. Wet fur and rot. But stronger now, much, much stronger. And it wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to move around the edge of our camp, circling just beyond where the fire could reach. "Maybe there's a dead animal nearby," Gabe said. Then we heard the movement, heavy footfalls in the underbrush heading north. We all grabbed our flashlights and shined them at the trees. The beams cut through the dark, illuminating trunks and branches, but nothing else. But something was definitely out there. For maybe an hour we heard it moving around us, always staying just out of sight. There were branches snapping and that heavy tread. At one point there was a sound like something large dragging against bark. We kept the fire going high. Not one of us thought we should go investigate. Nobody suggested leaving either, though. Hiking out in the dark seemed worse than just staying put, staying together. That's when Terry freaked out. "Did you hear that?" He stood up, staring out into the woods. "Holy crap, someone just called my name." "I didn't hear anything, Terry," Christian replied. "No, man, that was Amy's voice." Amy was his girlfriend. She was back in Rockville, nowhere near these woods. "That was definitely Amy." We sat there in silence. The fire crackled. I was about to tell Terry he was hearing things when I heard it too. "Grayson." My mother's voice coming from the trees to the east, calling my name the way she used to when I was a kid and dinner was ready. Gabe heard his sister and Christian heard his father. Matthew heard his ex-girlfriend, the one who'd moved to California just a year ago. The voices all came from different directions, never the same place twice. They were perfect mimicries. They weren't recordings. There was too much life in them, too much personality. But they were wrong in some other way. There was something underneath them, something that made my skin crawl. None of us moved from that fire. Christian had his flashlight trained on the trees, sweeping back and forth. "This isn't real," he kept saying. "This isn't possible." Then his beam landed on something. It was between two oak trees maybe 30 yards out, standing motionless. The light hit it for just a second before Christian jerked the flashlight away with a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. But I'd seen it. We all had seen it. Something was there, hunched forward with massive shoulders, too wide for a normal man. But the head was what really stuck out, a silhouette with horns curved and thick and a jutting snout. The eyes reflected back, bright and flat, utterly without anything I'd call consciousness. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. Christian's flashlight was shaking so badly by then, the beam was practically useless. "We need to leave," Terry said. "We need to get to the cars right now." "It's a quarter mile in the dark," Gabe said. "Through the woods, with that thing out there. We can't stay here." "We can't go either." We argued about it, voices rising. Eventually, we decided we'd stay together by the fire until first light, then pack up fast and leave. We had weapons of a sort. A camping hatchet, knives, heavy mag lights. We'd keep the fire big. We'd take turns watching. It was only a few hours until dawn, right? And that was the longest night of my life. This thing circled our camp continuously. Sometimes we'd see movement in the darkness, just at the edge of what we could perceive. Sometimes we'd hear it, with its heavy breathing like bellows and the snapping of branches. Once, around 2 a.m., we heard something that sounded like laughter, low and thick and absolutely inhuman. But it was certainly laughter. The voices continued intermittently. People we knew, people we'd loved, calling our names from the dark, asking us to come see them, telling us they were hurt, that they needed our help, and to come quick. But we didn't go. We huddled by that fire, and we fed it everything we could reach without leaving the light. Around 4 a.m., everything went silent. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the noise could have been. We sat there hardly breathing at all, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Minutes passed, and the fire crackled. Far away, a real animal, a raccoon, I think, began to move through the brush. "Maybe it left," Terry whispered. We weren't about to believe that. Dawn came slowly, the way it does when you've been up all night waiting for it. The darkness went gray, then lighter gray, then that pale wash that means morning is finally, actually arriving. We could see the trees around us again, and we could see that there was nothing there. We were exhausted and terrified, but it was morning now. Time to pack up. Time to get the heck out. We moved quickly, taking down tents and shoving everything into bags without bothering to organize it properly. We were all so focused and in a hurry that we didn't really talk. We kept checking the woods, but in the daylight, everything looked normal. Just trees and forest. Nothing to be afraid of. I remember thinking as we finished packing that we'd made it through. That whatever that thing was, it was a creature of the dark. So now in the light, we were safe. Like it was some Hollywood monster movie with rules. I also remember thinking we'd just have to make it to the service road, to the cars, then this would all be over. But I was very, very wrong. We threw everything into the bags without care for organization. Tent poles jabbed through fabric. Sleeping bags went in still half stuffed. Nobody spoke except to say things like, "Got it," or "Ready." We moved as a unit, constantly checking the trees around us, though in the morning light there was nothing to see. The hike out felt longer than a quarter mile. None of us wanted to be last in line. We kept bunching up and practically walked on each other's heels. Eventually, we forced ourselves to spread out a bit, but then we ended up bunching up soon after. Still, the woods were just woods in the daylight. There was bird song and sun coming through the leaves, a chipmunk scattering away from the path. Normal, so beautifully normal. Terry tried to lighten things up halfway through. "So that's it for camping, right? We're all in agreement? Next trip is somewhere with room service." It got a weak laugh. Christian and Gabe started discussing what we'd actually seen, or what we thought we'd seen. The silhouette, the horns. It could have been a deer, Christian suggested. At worst, it could have been someone screwing with us, Gabe said. Matthew kept quiet. But then Matthew was always quiet. We reached the service road, and there were the cars, exactly where we'd left them. Gabe's SUV and Christian's sedan, covered in pollen and tree debris but otherwise untouched. The sight of them was absurdly reassuring. Metal and glass and modernity. We loaded the gear quick, shoving bags into trunks and back seats. I remember that moment clearly. We were about to get in. I had my hand on the door handle of Gabe's SUV, and I felt that wash of relief too. We'd made it, and whatever that thing was, it was behind us now. We would just drive away, and this would become one of those stories you tell at parties, embellishing it a little more each time, until even you're not sure what really happened. I then did a mental count of the gear, making sure we hadn't left anything. Tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, cooler. Then I counted the people. 5. Gabe, Christian, Terry, Matthew, me. 5. That was right. That was the number that had come out here on Friday. But something was wrong. I stood there with my hand on the door handle, trying to figure out what was bothering me. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Stress. We'd been up all night, scared out of our minds. Of course I felt strange. "Hey, you good?" Gabe asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." We split up between the cars. I rode with Gabe and Terry. Christian and Matthew took Christian's sedan. "We'd caravan out," Gabe said, sticking together until we hit the highway. That old road was rutted and overgrown. Branches would scrape against the windows. It took about 15 minutes of careful driving before we made it to pavement. Then another 20 minutes to the next route, heading north toward the Beltway. Normal roads, normal traffic. The world going about its business like nothing happened. Gabe suggested stopping for gas. We were all running low and nobody wanted to risk getting separated. We pulled into a station just south of Laurel, both cars side by side at the pumps. Everyone got out. The sun was fully up now, bright and ordinary. People were filling up their tanks and going into the convenience store for coffee and lottery tickets. I watched an old woman put air in her tires. "I need coffee," Terry said, "and a piss. Not necessarily in that order." We went inside, all 5 of us. Christian made a joke about how terrible we probably smelled. The clerk was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who didn't even glance up from her phone. I got some coffee and stood by the Kramer station, doctoring it with too much sugar. That's when I really looked at the group, at my friends. Everything seemed fine. Tired and rumpled, but fine. Terry was joking with Gabe by the chipwreck. Christian was in the bathroom. Matthew was studying the cooler full of energy drinks with that focused look he got sometimes. But still, something was off. I couldn't place it. A mannerism? The way someone was standing? I kept watching, trying to figure out what my hind brain was screaming about. Back outside, pumping gas, Christian suggested breakfast. "We should probably eat something real," he said. "Make sure everyone's actually okay before we all head home." There was a diner just up the road. We agreed to it easily. All of us were hungry, and none of us wanted to be alone yet, I think. We followed each other there, 3 minutes away, pulling into the parking lot. It had that chrome and neon aesthetic that promised mediocre food and strong coffee. Inside, we took a booth near the back. We ordered eggs and pancakes and hash browns. The normalcy of everything was overwhelming. Menus and laminated tables and a waitress who called us hun. Less than 2 hours ago, we'd been in the woods, being stalked by something that shouldn't exist. Now we were in a diner, enjoying eggs and pancakes. We talked. Small talk at first. How terrible each other looked. How much sleep we would need to feel human again. Then, inevitably, we talked about what happened. "I kept thinking we overreacted," Christian said. "I mean, we saw something. But in the dark, with flashlights, your mind fills in the blanks. It could have been..." "It wasn't a freaking deer, Christian," Terry interrupted. "I know what deer look like." "I'm not saying it was a deer. I'm saying maybe it wasn't what we thought it was." "And the voices?" Gabe asked quietly. Nobody had an answer for that. Matthew had been quiet, working through his eggs methodically. Eventually, he said, "The worst part was when we heard it circling the camp, when Terry was on watch, and it got close to the tents." I looked up from my coffee. When was that?" I asked. "Around 1, maybe? 1:30? When you and Gabe were sleeping, and Terry was keeping watch." "Matthew," I said slowly, "you weren't at the camp at the time. You went to get water from the creek." "No, I didn't," he said, smiling. "I was right there." "No, you went to refill the bottles. You were gone for like 10 minutes. We were worried about you." The smile didn't waver. "I think you're misremembering. I was there the whole time." I looked around the table. Gabe shrugged. He'd been half asleep. He hadn't seen. Christian looked confused, and Terry was frowning, trying his best to remember. "Pretty sure you were there, man," Terry said to Matthew. But I knew Matthew had gone to the creek because I'd watched him leave myself. Watched him walk into the dark with the empty water bottles, terrified he would never come back. I looked at Matthew carefully now. Really looked. It was Matthew. Same face, same build, same clothes he'd been wearing yesterday. He even sat the same way and was slightly hunched over his food. Everything was right, but everything was wrong. "Excuse me," I said, and I slid out of the booth. I headed to the bathroom. In the mirror, I looked like crap. Dark circles, pale skin, hair sticking up all over. I ran some water and splashed my face, trying to think more clearly. 5 people had gone into those woods. Me, Gabe, Christian, Terry, Matthew. 5 people were at this diner. The math was right. So why did I feel so wrong? I counted again. In the bathroom, me. At the table, 4 others. 5 total. That was correct. So why were my hands shaking? When I came back to the table, everyone was still eating and talking. I slid into my seat and just watched, trying to figure out what my instincts were screaming about. Matthew picked up his fork. I raised an eyebrow. He held it the way a child would hold it, overhand. It was a small thing to notice. Maybe he'd always held his fork that way and I'd never noticed before. Then he smiled at something that Christian said, and the smile seemed a bit too wide. And his eyes, there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite right. Not obviously wrong, but off. I couldn't help myself. "Matthew," I said, "you remember that concert we went to in Baltimore? What was that band's name?" He looked at me. "Which concert?" "The one at the Auto Bar, 2 years ago. You spilled beer all over yourself." "Oh, right," he said. "That was, God, I can't remember the name. An indie rock band?" "Yeah. Local guys, right?" Matthew and I had never been to a concert together. We barely knew each other before this trip. He was Gabe's friend from work. "You're not Matthew," I said. The table went silent. Everyone stared at me. "What?" Matthew said, still smiling. "You're not Matthew." Gabe leaned forward. "Dude, what are you talking about? Have you gone insane?" "That's not him. That is not Matthew." Christian put his hand on my arm. "Man, you've been up all night. You're exhausted. We all are." "Look at him," I said. "Really look at him." They looked. They saw Matthew, tired and confused, watching me, concerned. "I think you need some sleep," Terry said quietly. "Maybe we should take you to—" "Matthew and I have never went to a concert together," I said. "That was a test, and he answered it." "Maybe he just went along with it because you sounded so sure," Gabe said. I looked at Matthew, just looked at him, and he looked back, still smiling a too wide smile. "Where is he?" I asked. "What did you do with the real Matthew?" "Oh God, man, I think you're having some kind of episode," Christian said. His hand was still on my arm, trying to anchor me. "Last night was screwed up, yeah, but we're all screwed up. But Matthew's right here." But I was certain now. The thing from the woods was sitting across from me, wearing Matthew's face. "I need air," I said, and I pulled away from Christian. I slid out of the booth and walked fast toward the door. Outside in the parking lot, I leaned against Gabe's SUV, breathing hard. What was I supposed to do about this? Scream, "Help me, my friend's been replaced"? Everyone would think I'm insane. Maybe I was insane. But if I wasn't, if that thing was really in there pretending to be Matthew, then the real Matthew was still in those woods, hurt, or worse. The diner door opened. All 4 of them came out, walking toward me carefully, like I was a rabid animal. "Hey," Gabe said gently, "let's talk about this." "You need to see a doctor," Christian said. "I'm serious, man. I think the stress—" "I'm fine," I said. I need to go back." "Back home?" "No, to the campsite. I left something there." It was a lie. I'd never been good at lying, but I needed to search for Matthew. Needed to find him before. "We're not going back there," Christian said flatly. "No freaking way." "Then I'll go alone." "That's an even worse idea," Terry said. We argued, raising our voices in the parking lot of that diner, while other customers came and went. Gabe tried to mediate. Christian insisted I needed professional help. Terry just looked uncomfortable. Matthew, though, he stood slightly apart, watching everything go down, but not saying anything. Finally, Gabe sighed. Okay, okay. I'll go back with you. We'll do a quick search, check the campsite for what you lost. And you'll see that there's nothing wrong. We can all go home and sleep this off. I'll go too, Matthew said. The words sent ice down my spine. You don't have to, I started. I want to help, he said, that smile again. We should stick together. I looked at Gabe, trying to communicate something with my eyes. Don't let him come. But Gabe just looked too tired for this. He was also worried and slightly annoyed. Fine, Christian said. 3 of you go. Terry and I will just wait here. We'll give you 2 hours. If you're not back by then, we're gonna call the cops. Fair enough, Gabe said. So that was it. 3 of us would go back to those woods. Me, Gabe, and the thing pretending to be Matthew. We got in Gabe's SUV, me in the front passenger seat, Matthew in the back. Gabe started the engine. This is a waste of time, Gabe muttered, pulling out of the parking lot. There's nothing at that campsite. I watched Matthew in the side mirror. He sat very still, his hands folded in his lap. He looked out the window at the passing scenery. I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. That wasn't Matthew, and whatever it was, I was about to be alone with it in the woods. The drive back to that old road took 25 minutes. Neither Gabe nor I spoke much. Matthew said nothing at all. When we pulled onto the rutted dirt road, heading back toward where we'd camped, my stomach turned. Gabe parked near where we'd parked before. We got out. The woods were completely silent. Let's make this quick, Gabe said. What did you leave? I couldn't remember what I'd claimed to have left, if I claimed anything at all. My mind was blank. Behind us, Matthew smiled. Lead the way, he said softly. And we walked back into the trees. The hike back to the campsite was worse the second time. Gabe kept asking what I'd left behind, and I kept giving vague answers. My backpack, I said. Important stuff in it. He didn't push, but I could feel his frustration building. Behind us, Matthew said nothing. I kept turning to check on him. He was always there, maintaining the same distance, the same calm expression on his face. He was in no hurry, not worried one bit. We reached the campsite around noon. The fire pit was cold, full of white ash. Our footprints from the morning were still visible in the soft earth, but there was no sign of anything else. No sign of Matthew, the real Matthew. Okay, where is it? Gabe said. What did you leave? I need to search around here, I said. Can you help me look? Look for what? Just help me. He sighed but started walking the perimeter of our old site. I peered into the woods, looking for Matthew. Behind me, the other Matthew stood very still, watching. I'm gonna try further in, I said, pointing toward where we'd run from last night, toward where we'd seen the thing between the trees. This is insane, Gabe said, but he followed. We pushed deeper into the refuge, off the trail now, moving through undergrowth. I kept my eyes open for Matthew, any sign or trace of him. Gabe was getting more irritated with each passing minute. This Matthew followed behind us like a shadow. I then found tracks in a patch of soft ground near a fallen log. They looked like large cloven hoofprints, pressed deep into the ground. Pretty recent. The edges were still sharp, not eroded by weather. Look, I said to Gabe. He crouched down, studying them. These are... what are these? You know what they are. The tracks led deeper in, toward a steep slope I hadn't noticed before. The ground dropped away suddenly, a ravine maybe 20 feet deep, thick with brush and vines. We should go back, Gabe said. This is crazy, Help. I heard it then, a sound from below, crying, moaning, something human in pain. Did you hear that? Gabe nodded, his eyes wide. We approached the edge carefully. I called down. Hello? Is someone down there? The sound came again. I was certain then. It was human, and they needed help. We have to go down, I said. That's a bad idea. Someone's hurt down there. I found a spot where the slope was less steep, where exposed roots might serve as handholds. We started to descend without waiting for Gabe's agreement. Behind me, I heard him curse, then start climbing down after me. It was treacherous. Loose soil, roots that gave way under your weight, branches that scratched and grabbed. I slipped twice, barely catching myself. But I made it to the bottom, landing in ankle-deep leaf litter. The sound was closer now, to my left, hidden in heavy brush. I pushed through, and I found him. Matthew. The real Matthew. He was partially buried in leaves and debris, his leg bent at a bad angle, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. But his eyes were open and alert. When he saw me, something like relief flooded his face. Thank God, he whispered. I thought it would come back. Gabe crashed through the brush behind me, taking one look at Matthew and going completely pale. Jesus Christ, what happened? It took me, Matthew said. His voice was barely there. Last night, during my watch, I was away from the fire for a minute, getting water. Something grabbed me from behind, dragged me away. I couldn't scream. My leg. I looked up at the edge of the ravine. The other Matthew was standing there, looking down at us, not moving to help, not calling out to ask if we'd found anything, just watching. I watched as the figure's posture began to shift, subtle at first, the shoulders broadening, the spine curving forward, the proportions becoming all wrong. Gabe, I said quietly, look up there. He looked up, and he saw it too. The thing that had been pretending to be Matthew was dropping the pretense, its back hunched, head lowering, limbs extending. The human shape it had worn like a costume began to fall away. What the heck? Gabe breathed. What is that? It stood at the edge of the ravine, its true form revealed now. Bipedal, 7 feet tall, fur covered with massive shoulders. The head was goat-like, elongated snout and curved horns and all that. But its eyes were forward-facing like a predator's, like a human's. It looked down at us and made a sound that wasn't quite laughter, not quite the bleat of a goat, but something in between. It had been with us since we left the camp this morning, sitting in the diner, riding in Gabe's car, walking beside us through these woods. No signal, Gabe said, looking at his phone with shaking hands. I don't have any freaking signal down here. The goat man started descending the ravine, slowly, taking its time because it knew we were trapped. We have to move. We need to go somewhere now, I said. Gabe and I pulled Matthew up, supporting him between us. His leg couldn't take any weight. He bit back a scream as we started to move, crashing through the undergrowth along the ravine bottom. Behind us, the thing followed. Not rushing. These were its woods, its territory. It knew every inch. The ravine opened up into a wider creek bed. We followed it, desperate for any path that led out. Matthew was in bad shape. His breathing was shallow and his weight became heavier between us. We were slowing down. "We can't stop," Gabe panted. "Keep moving." The creek forked ahead. One branch seemed to curve back toward the interior of the refuge, darker and more overgrown. The other looked slightly more open, might lead out toward the roads. We took the open one, staggering along it for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Matthew's head lolled against my shoulder. Then I realized we'd chosen wrong. The trees were getting denser. There were no signs of trails or roads, no signs of traffic. We were heading deeper into the refuge, not away from it. "Gabe," I said, "we have to go back." He was about to answer when we saw it. Ahead of us, blocking our path, stood the goat man. It had circled around, herded us deliberately. This wasn't a chase. It was a hunt, and we were prey that didn't understand that game. "Put me down," Matthew whispered. "Hide me. You need to do something." "We're not leaving you," Gabe said. "You don't have a choice." We lowered Matthew behind a fallen log, covering him with branches as best we could. Then Gabe and I grabbed what we could find: heavy branches, rocks, pathetic weapons against something like that. It watched us prepare, almost curious. Then it charged. I've been in exactly one fight in my life, a shoving match outside a bar when I was 22. This wasn't a fight. This was being hit by a truck. It crashed into Gabe first, taking him down hard. They went into the creek bed together, water splashing up. Gabe was screaming, trying to get his arms up to protect his face, but that thing was on top of him, impossibly strong, the goat head snapping down. I hit it with the branch I'd been holding, brought it down on its back with everything I had. The branch shattered. But it worked. The goat man turned its attention to me. It rose up from Gabe, pivoting with a fluid grace that something that big shouldn't have. Its eyes locked on mine. I could smell its breath, rancid and metallic. Something animal, something ancient. I could see its teeth. There were too many of them. It took a step forward. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, and I went down hard. Gabe tackled it from behind then. I don't know where he found that strength. He was bleeding from his face and chest, but he hit that thing with his full weight, wrapping his arms around its torso. "Go!" he screamed at me. "Get Matthew and go!" The goat man spun, throwing Gabe against a tree. The sound of impact was terrible. But Gabe held on, dragging the thing down, giving me the seconds I needed. It was the worst moment of my life, worse than anything that came after, because I ran. I pulled Matthew up, got him over my shoulder in a fireman's carry, and I ran back the way we'd came, leaving Gabe there, fighting something that couldn't be fought, buying us time with his life. Behind me, Gabe's screams cut through the woods until they stopped. There was only silence then, and then the sound of heavy footsteps. It was coming. I crashed through the underbrush, Matthew's dead weight nearly pulling me down with each step. My lungs were on fire, my legs were shaking, and still I ran. The creek bed, then the fork. Back the other way now, the way we should have gone in the first place. I couldn't hear anything over my own ragged breathing and the sound of branches breaking as I pushed through. Then I saw the trail, an actual marked trail with a wooden sign and a posted map. Signs of humanity, of order, of safety. I staggered onto it, nearly falling, caught myself on a trail marker. Matthew groaned against my shoulder. I kept moving along the trail, praying it would lead somewhere, anything but deeper into this nightmare. The trail was well maintained, gravel under my feet. It curved through the trees, marked with occasional signs. I followed it because I had no other options. And I could feel it behind me. Not see it. It was staying just out of sight now, moving parallel to the trail through the trees. But I knew it was there. I could hear the branches shifting, and I could sense its attention fixed on us. The trail sloped upward. My legs were screaming, and Matthew was barely conscious. His breathing was shallow and fast. I climbed, one step after another, because stopping meant death. Finally, I saw pavement. The trail ended at a paved park road, empty but beautifully, impossibly real. Asphalt and painted lines and a metal road sign. I stumbled out onto it, went to my knees, Matthew sliding off my shoulder. I looked back at the tree line. It was there. The goat man stood at the edge of the woods, exactly where the pavement began. It was watching us. It wasn't moving forward. It couldn't, I thought, or it wouldn't. Something about the boundary of the forest, the hard edge of civilization, held it back. Was it because it was in its true form? We stared at each other for a moment. Then it stepped backward into the trees. Like that, it was gone. I couldn't move. Matthew was unconscious beside me on the road. We'd gotten out, we had made it. But not Gabe. I heard an engine. I looked up to see headlights approaching. A park service vehicle came around the corner. The ranger inside slowed down as he saw us collapsed in the middle of the road. He got out, asking us questions I couldn't yet process. He asked if we were okay, what happened, if we needed an ambulance. I looked past him toward the woods, towards where the darkness between the trees, where something that shouldn't exist might be waiting, where my friend had died, buying us the time to escape. "There's someone else. There's someone else in the woods. We have to," I said. But even as I said it, I knew there was nothing left to find. Nothing left they could do. The ranger was on his radio, calling for medical support, asking our names and where we'd been. I looked at Matthew, still breathing but only barely. Then back at the woods. I knew with absolute certainty that whatever had happened in there, whatever we'd encountered, the world was not going to believe us, could not believe us. The woods kept their secret, and one of them was Gabe. 15 minutes is how long it took for the ambulance to arrive, but that felt like hours. Matthew had stopped responding. His breathing was so shallow, I wasn't sure he was going to make it. His skin was cold, like a corpse. "Shock," a paramedic said. She tried to keep him warm with a blanket. EMTs worked on him. He was critical. They got him stabilized enough to move and loaded him up quickly. I was ambulatory, they said. Cuts and scratches, exhaustion, possible concussion, but I could walk. As the ranger pounded me with more questions, I answered. "Bear," I said. The lie was instinctive. "Bear attack. My friend, Gabe, he's still out there. There were 2 others, Christian and Terry, but they're waiting at the diner." "Where did this happen?" I tried to explain. The creek bed, the ravine, somewhere past the marked trails. Before long, my words weren't making sense. The ranger kept asking me to slow down, to breathe. They then loaded me into the ambulance with Matthew. As the doors closed, I got one last look at the woods. The trees were just trees in the afternoon light. Normal, seemingly innocent. But I knew better. At the hospital, Matthew went straight to surgery. He had a compound fracture of the femur, possible internal bleeding, severe dehydration. I was taken to an examination room where a doctor cleaned my cuts and checked me over. There were some bruised ribs, lacerations, exhaustion, but nothing life-threatening. Some police arrived while I was being stitched up. 2 cops, young and professional. They needed my statement about what happened. So I had to re-explain everything again. The female officer called it in, contacting the Laurel Police Department. She asked them to send over someone to the diner to check on the 2 men waiting there. She then came back into my examination room and said something that made my blood freeze. "Sir, the officers at the diner are confused. Your friends Christian and Terry are there, as you said, but so is Gabe. They said they've been waiting there since you left with Matthew." I stared at her. "That's not possible." "They're pretty certain. They say he's been with them for over 3 hours." "He couldn't have been. He was with us. I watched him be attacked and—" She looked at her partner. The look said everything. I was in shock. I got a head injury. I was seeing things. "We need you to start from the beginning, please," she said carefully. So I did. Matthew pulled through, made a complete recovery, and you would never know what he had been through by just looking at him today. Terry and Christian are just fine. Still sometimes make fun of me for begging to go back to that god-awful clearing that day, just to get attacked by a bear. Gabe, though, he's a different story. It took me so long to trust him again. I'd watched who I thought was Gabe be attacked by the goat man. I'd heard his dying screams in the distance as I ran away. But when I saw him again in person, I was watching him like an interrogator, trusting nothing he did or said. Unlike the fake Matthew, though, Gabe, even after weeks, did not behave strangely. There was nothing off. Nothing except the misaligned events in my head. Gabe had come with me, had drove us back out to the woods, didn't he? Or is the goat man able to warp your thoughts and your mind entirely? I struggled for some time. When such an important and traumatic event makes absolutely no sense in your head, it can make you feel depressed, even psychotic. Eventually, like Matthew, I pulled through in my own way. Now, Gabe and I are the friends we used to be. To the others, they thought I drove out with Matthew to go find something back at the campsite, and that's the end of it. We've all agreed to stop bringing this up, likely just to keep my mental wounds from tearing back open. It's stories like this that give me hope that a creepypasta renaissance might one day be upon us. Well, that is if this story is fake. Like many stories people send me, the author of this story claims it's true. If it is, I hope you find peace from these horrible events. If not, thank you for a chilling story. Good night. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can get my new one and only coffee over at eeriecast.store. Make your morning something to fear with the Morning Brew. Also, be sure to rate and follow Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. If you'd rather, you can just subscribe to me on YouTube at Darkness Prevails. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy. because this world is a strange one. What do you know the state of Wisconsin for? Cheese? Beer? What about the strange tall man that lurks in the woods and takes the heads of lost men? Haven't heard of that one, have you? This week on Unexplained Encounters, a story submitted by Driftless Daughter details her grandfather's bizarre rituals on his Wisconsin farm and what happens when those rituals are not adhered to. This disturbing story is titled Second Cutting. Keep your head. In the summer of 2009, I was 16 years old. I got sent to live on my grandparents' dairy farm in southwestern Wisconsin. They had a small operation of 40 cows milked twice a day by two people in their 70s out in the driftless hills southwest of Oroka. It was in one of those dead-end valleys the locals call coulees. The glaciers that flatten the rest of the Midwest missed that corner of the state. So instead of flat cornfields, it's steep wooded ridges and deep narrow valleys, like somebody crumpled up all the land, but never smoothed it back out. The roads follow the creeks. Cell service didn't work out there at all, and when my mother dropped me off that June, I lost my phone signal 20 minutes before I lost her taillights. I just remember thinking my life was over. My parents had split up that spring. There was no affair, no screaming, just they quit being happy with each other. The divorce meant the house would get sold, and that meant for one summer there was nowhere for me to be, while my mother moved us into an apartment in Madison. Her solution was her parents' farm. She pitched it to me. You'll have fresh air and time to think. But all I heard was exile. I cried the whole way down Highway 14, and my mother let me. She hugged me in the gravel driveway and told me she would call the landline every Sunday, and drove away. But, good news, it turned out to be the best summer of my life. It's also the reason I still sleep with something playing in my ears. Podcast, YouTube, you name it. But it's gotta be something. My grandparents were Earl and Dorothy. Grandpa Earl was 74 that summer, a chiseled old man, one of those old farmers who looked skinny until you watched him throw a hay bale one-handed, and he wore a seed cap so sweat-stained it had gone from red to a color I'm not sure I have a name for, but something between brown and reddish yellow. He wasn't much of a talker, and I don't mean that in a cold way. He was simply never the type to waste words. Grandma Dorothy was the opposite, 71 and sharp as a tack, and she ran the house and the books and had opinions on every little thing, and those opinions she would share at volume. Her favorite topic was my grandfather, who she had been married to for 52 years, and she always referred to him as your grandfather, in a tone that could land anywhere between proud and straight fed up. There was Duke, their farm dog, some kind of shepherd collie mix. He was 10 years old and gray around the muzzle, and the single most sensible creature on that property. The farm itself sat at the head of a dead-end valley. The gravel road followed the creek 2 miles past 3 other farms and ended at their place. Behind the house and barn, the valley kept going another half-mile, narrowing the whole way, and that backstretch was theirs too. A long triangle of pasture and hay ground running up to the wooded ridge at the end of the coulee. Everybody called it the Back 40, though Grandpa told me once it was actually 36 acres. The creek came down out of those woods, except by July it wasn't a creek anymore, but a dry, stony ditch cutting across the valley floor like a line somebody had drawn. That was called the Dry Run. The first 2 weeks, I was a mess. I sulked and wore earbuds at the dinner table until Grandma removed them from my ears with 2 fingers, like she was picking ticks off a dog. She set them by my plate without a word, which was somehow worse than her yelling at me. Grandpa didn't try to talk to me at all, but he did assume that I would be helping around the property. So the second morning he knocked on my door at 4:45 and said, through the door, "Cows don't milk themselves." That was the whole speech. I'm not sure why I got up. Honestly, I think I was too surprised to refuse him. I stumbled down to the barn in the still dark, in my mom's old boots, which were somehow still in the mudroom from 1985, and Grandpa handed me a bucket of warm water. He showed me how to wash a cow's udder before the milking unit goes on. And that was my job for days. Wash the next cow, move down the line. A milking barn at 5 in the morning in summer is one of the best places on this earth. It's warm, but not like a furnace, but a cozy warm created by 40 big animals putting off heat. And it smells like hay and molasses feed. I know that might sound bad to some, but it's not. It's super cozy. Every cow goes to her own stanchion. They know their spots better than kids in a classroom, and the milk pump runs its steady thumping pulse. Under all that, there's the radio. There was an old radio on a shelf up there, coated in 40 years of dust. There was an old radio on a shelf up there, coated in decades of dust and fly specks. It was tuned to an AM station out of La Crosse that played polka and farm reports. Saturday mornings it carried a call-in swap show where a man might spend 4 minutes describing a used hay rake. And it was always on. We'd finish milking and Grandpa would shut off the pump and the lights, but he always left the radio playing to an empty barn. All day, all night. I asked about it, still in my sarcastic phase. "Do the cows like polka?" He replied to me without even looking. "Barn's never quiet, that's all." His tone said, "Never ask again," so I didn't. Maybe it was just old person weirdness. By the end of June, something had shifted in me. I couldn't have told you when it happened. The chores did it. Every adult in my life had been telling me hard work would be good for me, and I'd wanted to die every time they said that. But there's a thing that happens when you do necessary work that a living animal depends on, twice a day, every day, where your brain starts to quiet down. You can't spiral about your parents' divorce while you're pushing feed up to 40 impatient cows. The farm don't care about your feelings, sweetheart. And that turned out to be exactly what my feelings needed. I learned the cows first. Holsteins mostly, plus a few Jerseys Grandma called "my little browns," and she spoiled them rotten. They all had names, often stereotypical names, but yeah, like Marigold. There always has to be a marigold in a cow herd. There was also Trouble, and she earned it. And Church, who once got loose on a Sunday and walked 1.5 miles down the valley. She was standing in the church lot when the 8 o'clock service let out. Cows seem to have personalities the same way people do. And by July, I knew all 40 by their udders alone, which is a skill I really never thought I'd have, and not something I would ever put on a resume. I learned the routine. We milked at 5 and ate breakfast after. Eggs from Grandma's own hens and bacon from a pig they bought off the neighbors. The Hilfigers, spelled the exact same as the clothing brand, but no relation. The middle of the day was field work. The big meal came at noon, and they call it dinner out here. Apparently that's a rural thing in these parts. Dinner at noon and supper at night. It took me half the summer to quit saying lunch. After evening milking and supper came the part I didn't expect to love, which was the hour when nothing happened. When Grandpa read the Farm Bureau paper in his chair, and Grandma worked on a crossword at the table, narrating her opinions about it. Duke would put his chin on my foot, and there was nothing to check and nowhere to be. After the first month, I stopped feeling that phantom buzz in my pocket and just, I don't know, existed. I've spent a lot of my adult life trying to get back to how those evenings felt, but I'm starting to believe it's something you only get out in those parts, with that kind of life. Now, my grandpa. He was the hardest of the two to figure out. He taught you things by handing them to you. He'd be fixing the sickle mower and just hold out a wrench, and that meant get in here and watch. And he would never say good job. You knew you'd done the calf feeding right because the next day it was simply yours to do. The first time he actually complimented me out loud was mid-July. I backed up the hay wagon into the shed on the first try, which steers backward from everything your brain believes, and he watched me do it, then said, "Well." Just, "Well." Grandma heard it and called over from her garden, "That's basically a standing ovation, honey. Don't let it go to your head now." Somewhere in the middle of all that, I fell in love with the whole place, with that whole way of living. It was the safest I'd ever felt anywhere. That ended up being the cruelest part, because there was something out there at the end of that valley. It didn't ruin one bad night for me. It creeped its way into all the good ones too. I'll get there. The salt came next, after the radio. Every Saturday evening after milking, Grandpa poured a full unbroken line of salt across the big sliding barn door track and the walk door. There was also a line across the bottom of the porch steps at the house, where it most likely looked like stained concrete. He kept it in an old Folgers coffee can on a shelf in the milk house, and he poured it very carefully and slowly. I was a city kid, so I assumed it was for like snails or slugs or something. But it was not for that. Then there were the Sunday walks. After dinner every Sunday, rain or shine, Grandpa walked the fence line of the back 40. Now, farmers do check their fences. That's normal. But I didn't think this was just checking the fence. He barely looked at the wire. He would walk the line slowly with the coffee can in one hand, and at certain spots and posts, not every post, certain ones, he would stop and pour a little salt at the base, pressing it down with his boot heel. The posts he salted weren't special that I could see. Some were old gray split cedar standing in a line of newer steel ones. And at the top corner of the back 40, where the pasture met the woods at the very end of the valley, there was a stone. It was square cut, about knee height, leaning, and the marks on its top face were worn too smooth to read. Grandpa would put his hand flat on it for a second, like he was touching a door frame before walking through. Then he'd pour the rest of the can out around it in a circle, before walking back down. There was also the mowing. Hay gets cut more than once a summer. The first cutting comes in June, and the field grows back for a second cutting in July. In a good year, you can take a third cut in September. Everybody in that valley followed that rhythm. Grandpa did too, on every field, except one. The back 40 got its first cutting in June, and then he would never touch it again that year. By August, that field would be past your knees, thick and going to seed. Real money just standing there in the sun, while Grandpa bought hay off Roy Hilfiger to make up the difference. Bought it. And when Roy delivered a load in early August, I would hear him say, grinning. And when Roy delivered a load in early August, I heard him say, with a grin, "You know, Earl, you got a whole field of this back there." And I heard my grandfather reply, "Yeah." Roy quit grinning and looked off up the valley for a second. Then they started to talk about whatever. My grandparents had a rule that was never announced, but was enforced, that everybody be back inside by full dark. Sundown was fine, dusk chores are half of farming, but once that blue-black moment came when the yard light buzzed on, you were in the house. Grandpa was always the last one in. He'd stand on the porch a minute looking up the valley toward that back 40. Then he would come in and turn the porch light off. That was the day, over and done with. One July evening, I was out past the yard light catching fireflies in a jar. Nobody was watching. I thought I'd get away with it, but then I heard the screen door. Grandpa came to the edge of the light and said my name sternly. One time. Freaked me out enough that I walked back inside as fast as I could. Grandma thought every bit of it was ridiculous, and she let me know so. She mocked all of it, openly, cheerfully, for 52 years apparently. The salt especially. I was shelling peas with her on the porch one Saturday while Grandpa did his lines, and she nodded at him through the screen and said, "There he goes, seasoning the farm." She told me that when they married in 1957, his mother took her aside and told her the salting was the husband's job on this farm, and to not interfere. And Grandma said, and I quote, "I thought I'd married into people who worship the devil. Turns out they just worship sodium." But here's what took me years to understand about my grandmother. She mocked it, but she never stopped it. 52 years of jokes, and not once did she sweep a salt line away or serve supper late enough to keep him from his Sunday walk. She knew all of it and remembered all of it better than he did, because she talked about it. Everything I know about the lore of that valley I learned from a skeptic. She told me about Vernon Williams in the garden the first week of August, while we were picking beans. I'd finally worked up the nerve to ask why Grandpa wouldn't cut the back 40, and she laughed through her nose and said to me, "Because his father did, and his father didn't. And if you ask him, he'll tell you the ground's wet back there, which, it's not." Snap, snap, beans in the bucket. Then, in exactly the voice she used for telling me which neighbors watered down their cream 40 years ago, she said, "It got worse after Williams, of course. Everything got worse after Williams." "Who's Williams, Grandma?" "Vernon Williams. Farmed the next coulee over, the other side of that ridge." She pointed with a bean at the woods at the end of the valley. "Oh, this is what, 19 years back? 91, I think. He had a heifer get out in the fall, got up into the woods on the ridge. He went in after her toward evening, and never came back out. Now it is real steep in there, and they got a search up the next morning. The fire department and half the county walked lines through the trees. They found the old heifer first, standing down in a ravine and wouldn't move. They practically had to carry her back out. And they found Vernon, too, the third day. Sitting down, they said. Sitting against a tree with his hands in his lap like he was taking a rest." She stopped picking for a second, looked at the beans in her hand, and sighed, before saying, "And his head was gone." I remember how my eyes went wide then, and my pulse picked up a bit. "How was his head gone? What happened to him? What do you mean?" "Oh dear, it was gone," she said. "They never found his head. They looked, believe you me, they looked all fall, because you can't have quite the right funeral without the, head. The coroner ruled it was an animal. Coyotes, a bear come down from somewhere. Something scavenged him maybe after he died of a heart attack. That was the thinking. That's likely just what it was too. But of course the men around here couldn't leave it at just that. Your grandfather's generation, the older ones that were still alive then, they all got very quiet and very busy that winter, and a lot of salt was sold at the co-op that year. I can tell you, and Dolores Hilfiger told me her Roy started leaving the radio on in their barn too, which he'd always teased Earl about before. Men. They think it's something in the woods. Something that's always been in the woods that the old-timers knew about and walks the lines. And I'll tell you what I told Dolores. A bear doesn't carry a man's head off like a lunch pail, and neither does some boogeyman in the woods. Only a man can do a thing like that to another man. If it was anything but a bad heart and bad luck, had to be a person. That's worse than any story, if you ask me. That's why nobody wants it to be that. Too scary, the idea of having a person around who might cut your head off. So instead, there's a boogeyman in the woods, and we have to have the salt. There.
Now you know as much as anybody around here.
My grandmother was no fool. She was the least stupid person in the valley, and her version made the most sense to me. It still mostly makes sense. A county full of Norwegian and German farmers would rather believe in a woods thing with rules you can follow than a random death nobody can do anything about. She'd built herself a sensible account of her husband, and she lived in it comfortably. She got to stay comfortable for 52 years precisely because he kept doing the things she mocked. She could afford not to believe, so long as the salt kept flowing. I asked her what the old-timers called it, that thing out in the woods. She rolled her eyes so hard I could hear it, then said to me,
"Oh, honey, they don't call it anything. That's how you know it's men that made it up. Women would have at least given it a name."
Then she straightened up with her hand on her back and looked for a second at the end of the valley. It was the middle of a sunny afternoon. Then we carried the beans in. That's what I mean about receiving a warning from a skeptic. She told me it was nothing. Every part of her told me it was nothing, except when she herself checked, the way she eyed those mountains and those woods. August was a hot one. The creek had been down to nothing since July. Duke was the first one whose behavior actually started to scare me. Duke went everywhere on that farm all day, making rounds like he was the shift manager. But Duke would not cross the dry run. I'd noticed it vaguely all summer, the way he'd trail us on the Sunday walk as far as the crossing, then just sit in the grass, ears up, waiting until we came back. The first week of August, I decided to test him. I was 16 years old, and I had just heard that scary Williams story. So I walked across the dry run into the back pasture and called his name. "Duke! Come here, Duke!" Gotta be the best dog I ever knew. He minded you like a soldier. He walked to the very lip of that stony ditch and stopped like it was a wall of glass and started to whine. When I called again, sterner now, he did something I never saw before or after. He barked at me, twice, angrily, a tone I'd only ever heard him take against strange trucks. Then he walked 10 feet back toward the barn, sat down facing me, and waited for me to be sensible. I came back across, of course, and the moment I stepped over the dry run, he was all wags and apologies, pushing his head into my hands and glancing past me at the back 40 the whole time. I stood there scratching his ears with my heart going a little quick for no reason I could point to, and I remember actually saying it out loud to him, the stupidest sentence of my summer. I told him, "There's nothing back there, you big dummy." The cows agreed with the dog. You see, the back 40 was supposed to be grazing for the heifers, the young stock, but that August they wouldn't stay back there at all. Grandpa would move them across in the morning, and by afternoon they'd be bunched at the corner closest to the barn, and the grass would be there untouched. Yields were down in the milk barn too, which Grandpa blamed on the heat. It was hot, that's true, but I started noticing where the cows looked in the evening. Cows are always looking at something. They're prey animals, after all. They keep watch. These cows at dusk all faced the same way, up the valley. 40 heads pointed at nothing except for a field of hay going unused. But the first time I saw it was August, the night before my mom's Sunday call. I spent that whole call the next day not telling her. The first real secret I ever kept from my own mother. It was dusk, milking just done, and I'd been sent to bring in a garden hose from behind the machine shed. So I was standing at the corner of the shed with the coil on my shoulder, facing up the valley. The driftless does this thing at dusk where the ridges go black before the sky does, so the valley becomes a bowl of last light with dark rims, and the back 40 sat at the bottom of it. And along the top of the field where the fence ran against the woods, I was looking at the fence posts, a row of little dark verticals against the pale grass. Sort of just my mind going anywhere else, so I was staring at something yet nothing. But there was a post between the posts, I noticed. It wasn't dramatic, just a dark vertical in the fence line like the others, except the spacing wasn't right. It stood where no post should be, and it was too tall, taller than a fence post by a couple feet at least, and thinner. I stood there telling myself it was a post they never pulled, or a dead sapling. And then, at 400 yards or more, the top of it moved. A small, slow tilt, like a head turning. Every hair on my body stood up, because obviously fence posts don't do that, but also because it didn't move like wind had pushed it. It moved like it had noticed I'd stopped walking and wanted to look at me. The yard light buzzed on behind me. That's how close to full dark it was, and the screen door banged. Grandpa came out onto the porch like he did every night, and I heard his footsteps stop. I was expecting him to call my name, but he didn't. He came off the porch and crossed the yard to me directly, and stood next to me, looking where I was looking. By then, it was gone. In the few seconds I'd glanced toward the porch, the fence line had gone back to its right number of posts. Grandpa looked up at the valley a long time, apparently at nothing. At grass, I guess. Then took the hose off my shoulder and said to me, "Inside, now." He didn't seem frightened. I never once saw my grandfather scared. That helped me to stay together, more than anything else. But he wasn't surprised either, and that's what kept me awake that night. Whatever I had half seen at the top of that field, my grandfather had not been surprised by it. I slept with my window latched, in August, in a farmhouse with no air conditioning. Down across the yard all night, I could hear the barn radio playing polka to all those cows. And for the first time all summer, I understood there was more meaning to that radio than I initially thought. I tried again the next day, while we were fixing a water line, both of us on our knees in a trench. It turned into the longest conversation about it we ever had, which I think is only because his hands were so busy, and nobody was looking at him. I said to him, "Grandpa, what did I see last night?" He cleared his throat, but stayed silent for a while. I wasn't sure he was even going to answer, until eventually he said, "Fence line." I replied right away, "But I saw something there, standing at the fence line." He was quiet again. He got the coupling seated, then he said, "It stands there sometimes, along about when the hay would come ripe." I went still, shocked. That was already more than I expected out of him. I made the mistake of flooding him with questions and he didn't answer one of them. He just let me run out. Then he said the thing I've remembered ever since. He said, "It was on this land before the farm was. My granddad's granddad cut hay for it before he cut any for himself, and we let the back field stand for it now. We keep to our side after dark, and it keeps to its side. That's all the understanding there is. It's not a thing you learn about. It's just a thing you put up with and respect." Respect. That was the word my grandfather picked. A man who barely talked, and he spoke of this thing like it was a neighbor. The worst neighbor in the world, I imagine, one you have to salt your doors against. But a neighbor all the same, with a boundary line and a deed older than the farm. Before we climbed out, I asked about the stone. He wiped his hands on his pants and said to me, "Survey marker. Government men said it when they cut the lines through here. Before statehood, even." He looked at me sideways and added, "First lines anybody ever cut through these hills. Crews dragging chains through the woods, marking corners. One of those crews came up this coulee." He sat up then, coughed a little bit, and cleared his throat once more. "Not all of them came back down." Then he picked up his shovel. That was the end of the talk. I went to the library in town, and I found one sentence. In an 1856 county history, in the middle of a paragraph praising the valley's timber, it said, "The first survey of this town was attended by difficulty, the chainman refusing to complete the eastern line, and the corner was set at a distance by compass sight. So they set the corner from far away, because the men paid to walk that line would not walk it. And that was the corner with the stone, the one I'd put my hand on." After that, I couldn't look at the place the same. Nothing on the farm was any different. The days stayed golden and the work stayed good. And if anything, I loved it there more, now that I knew what it was costing my grandfather to keep it that way. But I'd finally seen what the habits were for. The radio wasn't a habit. It was there so a human voice never stopped inside that barn. The salt lines got renewed every Saturday, because boots and weather slowly broke them down throughout the week, and I caught myself stepping over them carefully now, not scattering the grain anymore. In the evening, when Grandpa stood on the porch looking up to the valley, I understood he wasn't taking in the air. He was doing rounds. He had been doing rounds since before my mother was born, and nobody in 3 generations had thanked him, because when he did it right, nothing ever happened. Nothing to thank him for. Well, not apparently. I saw it twice more that month, at dusk both times, and far off. Once at the fence line again, standing in the gap between 2 of the old cedar posts, the salted ones, and I'd swear it stood exactly centered between them, like it had measured them itself. And another time, the time that still gets me, not at the fence at all, but partway down the field, in the standing hay. The hay was well past your knees by then, and I could see too much of it above the grass. I never saw it close. Thank God for that. It stood taller than any man, with a thin body, with gray skin, the same gray as those old cedar posts it stood among. And it never moved while I watched. I'm not sure why. What did it want to do? What was its goal? Just standing there and waiting. It almost always stood exactly on its side of every line. But then it began to come down to the dry run. The last week of August, small signs began to show up on our side of the valley. On a farm, you know your ground like you know your own kitchen, and you notice when something's been moved. It started with Duke. He stopped making his rounds, and he pulled all his little patrols in close. He spent his nights on the porch facing up the valley, and some mornings he was hoarse. He had been barking in the night, alone, at nothing we ever saw or heard, until his voice wore out. So Grandma started letting him sleep inside, which she had sworn for a decade she would never do, and she made a joke about going soft, but no one laughed. Duke slept on the kitchen floor with his body against the door. Then it was the heifers. One morning, 3 of them were out, through a fence in the night, and not the back fence, the near one. They'd broken out of the safe pasture toward the barn, and we found them at dawn pressed against the barn wall, under the eave like cattle huddled against a windbreak in a blizzard. Except the night had been dead calm. The wire was pushed over from the pasture side. They had apparently hit it running, and in a soft spot along the dry run, there was a mark. It wasn't any kind of footprint. It was a long, narrow pressure mark, deep at one end, like a heavy post had been set down there and leaned on, then picked up again. Grandpa stood over it, fixated on it. Then he hitched an old harrow to the tractor, which he pulled to smooth out dirt, and dragged that whole strip of ground flat. I know that he wasn't erasing it to just get rid of it, like it was nothing. He was removing it because Grandma walked that way to her raspberry patch. Then came the radio, and after that night I stopped sleeping right. It was around the end of August. My window faced the yard and the barn, and you could always hear the radio from my room, faint but there. A voice or an accordion under the crickets, and it was honestly a comfort, and it meant all was well. That night I woke around 2, and lay there, slowly understanding I was listening to the crickets and nothing else. No radio. I got up and looked out. The yard light was on and everything seemed normal. The barn was a big pale shape, and I stood with my forehead against the screen telling myself the station just went off the air, but also that old radios can die. Their tubes burn out. But then, even the crickets stopped. The whole valley suddenly, all at once, went quieter than I knew outdoors could ever get. And out of that quiet, the barn made a different sound. One long groan of wood under load. The sound a barn makes in a windstorm when it takes a gust broadside. One time, but there was no wind. I didn't wake anybody, and the best answer I can give you for why I didn't was that I was a kid, a scared one at that. I stood at the window until the crickets came back, and at some point after that, the radio faded back in mid-polka, which is not what a burned-out tube does. I got back in bed, laying there stiff as a board, until Grandpa's alarm at 4:45. At milking the next morning, I told him everything I'd heard. He didn't stop milking, but when it was done, he did something I'd never seen him do. He got the coffee can on a Thursday and re-poured every line. And that Sunday, he carried the can and a spade, and at the old cedar posts, he didn't just pour salt. He cut a little trench post to post and filled it, a buried line clear across each gap. I helped him, and we didn't talk much. The woods were maybe 80 yards off, full of August shade, and I've never in my life felt so watched. Duke sat at the far side of the dry run the whole time, watching us from as close as he dared to come. On the walk back down, Grandpa said something. He said, "Hay's overripe." And I looked at the back field. All that standing grass gone heavy-headed and started to fall over in patches. I said, "Is that bad?" He replied, "It's never stood this late." I mulled that over in my mind for years before I got it. Other summers, that field got used. By late August, there'd be trails pushed through the grass and pressed down places the size of a truck where the hay lay flat, like a deer bed but bigger. And by fall, the whole field looked grazed off, though nobody ever saw an animal in it, and nobody ever cut it. That was the deal. The field was the rent, and every year the rent got taken. That summer the field stood perfect. No trails, nothing pressed down, the whole crop standing there going to waste into September. Whatever it was no longer taking what was left out for it, and it had started coming down to look at us instead. Even at 16, I could tell what was happening. Everything my grandfather did was still holding, and that thing of the valley. It was testing the perimeter, sometimes getting through. There was a thunderstorm on the 3rd of September. That was my last week. School would start after Labor Day, and my mom was coming Saturday to get me. I was heartsick about leaving. I never would have believed in June that I would feel that way. The whole day felt like storm weather. It was hot, swampy, and green-skied. The radio would interrupt the music to talk about severe thunderstorm watches for Vernon and Crawford counties. At supper, the phone rang. Grandma's sister Helen over in Westby had fallen and was in the ER in Baroka with a hip that they thought was broken. Grandpa did not like leaving his farm. I watched him stand at the window looking up the valley at the storm light while Grandma got her purse. I heard him say, "I don't like it." And Grandma replied, "Earl, she's my sister." They figured they'd be back by 10. Milking was already done and the storm was supposed to pass south. I was a teenager, not a toddler, so they let me stay. Grandpa stood in the doorway with the truck keys. He told me to keep the doors locked and leave the porch light on, that Duke would stay inside. Then he gave me the same look he'd given me in the trench, and he said, "You don't go outside. Whatever you hear. If there's trouble, phone the Hilfigers." "Okay, Grandpa," I told him. The storm didn't pass south. It came up the valley around 9, and coulee storms are an event. The thunder gets caught between the ridges and rolls back and forth, like someone moving barrels around upstairs. And the rain hit the house sideways. Duke had himself pressed flat against the kitchen door, shaking like a leaf. At 9:20-something, the lights browned and came back, and then went out for good. The yard light died with them, causing the whole valley to just disappear into the void. Outages weren't rare. I knew the drill. So I got the flashlight from the mudroom and stood in the kitchen listening to the rain. It took me a full minute to hear what I wasn't hearing. The radio was off too. That very same moment I realized that, from across the yard through the rain, came a sound I knew with my whole body after a summer of milking. It dropped my stomach right through the floor. One of the cows was mooing, screaming really. And if you've been around cattle, you know that's different from regular mooing. This was distress, over and over from the barn. And I knew exactly which animal, because we had exactly one animal due. A first calf heifer Grandpa had put in the box stall that very evening, because he didn't like how she'd been acting. It was Marigold, one of the 4th or 5th ones named Marigold, Grandma's little brown with the white smudge on her forehead. That was the heifer I'd halter broke myself in July, who followed me around her pen like a big anxious dog. And she was calving 10 days early, in the dark now, in the middle of a storm. There I stood in that kitchen, behind a locked door I'd promised to keep locked, while an animal I loved was in trouble 60 feet away across open darkness. Somewhere out in that dark, at a distance I had no way to judge, was the neighbor. I called the Hilfigers first. The line was dead, unfortunately. The storm had taken it down, or it went out with the power. And Marigold out there kept on screaming, rawer this time, and I thought about what might happen to her and her calf with no one there. You could lose them both in an hour. I thought about telling my grandfather I just stood in his kitchen and listened. Is that what he would do? What he would be proud of? I didn't think so. So I grabbed a lantern from the mudroom, and I put on his barn coat because it was closest, and it smelled like Grandpa, like hay and machine oil, and I think that helped me to get across the yard as much as the lantern did. Anyway, Duke stood at the door with me. I asked him, "You comin'?" That dog looked up at me, then at the door, and lay down on the floor with his ears flat.
and he gave me a whine. That dog was scared, and I wasn't sure if it was the storm. It was then I was beginning to think that that yard was not empty. I went anyway. The whole plan was to get to the barn, bar the door behind me, and wait for headlights with Marigold. I opened the kitchen door and the rain was already slacking, and the thunder had rolled off down the valley, so the lightning came late and low behind the ridges. I put the flashlight beam on the barn door 60 feet away, and I didn't sweep it around the yard. I did not want to see who or what else was out there with me. I had only one goal, one destination, and that was all I needed to see. In my head, I thought, if I didn't see something, it couldn't see me, so I could just keep walking. So I kept the beam on the door and just walked. The crickets had stopped, so had the frogs down at the creek, and about halfway across from up the valley, from some distance the dark made impossible to judge, one strand of fence made the sound wires make when something presses it down to step over. That low singing twang, then the softer sound of it coming back up. God, I wanted to run then, but I kept myself from doing it. It wasn't because I kept my head. My legs had gone so weak that walking was the best they could do. That's how scared I was. I got to the barn door. I saw that the salt line in the track had washed to a sodium slush. I rolled the door back and got inside, rolling it shut behind me and dropping the bar. I stood in the dark of that barn, with those dozens of cows breathing around me. Every single one was on her feet. If you don't know, cows lie down at night. They stand up when something is wrong. There were 40 animals in there, standing in the dark without a sound, every head turned toward the far end of the barn, the end that faced up the valley. Marigold was down in the box stall in the light of my lantern, and the calf was coming. It was coming right, thankfully, 2 little hooves and a nose, a textbook birth. She just needed time and calmness, when neither of us currently had any. I got in there with her, and I got her head in my lap like I'd seen Grandpa do with a downed cow. I talked to her, low and steady, half instructions I was remembering out loud, and half nonsense. At some point I understood I wasn't only talking for her. The radio was dead, and my voice was the only human voice in the valley. So for both our sakes, I dared not stop. But it came to the barn while the calf was being born. Things were finally moving with Marigold when I heard, over her, the fence at the near pasture. That same twang and release, close now, followed by nothing for a while. But then there were footsteps. I know what I heard. The steps were slow and too evenly spaced, yet too far apart. Each one landed flat all at once, like somebody setting the end of a heavy post down in the wet gravel over and over. It went along the barn wall away from me, one slow, flat step at a time, and every cow in that barn swung her head to follow it, but not one of them made a sound. At the far end, it stopped, and it knocked. There were 3 slow knocks on the boards, way up high on the wall, higher than the hay-mow door, each one heavy, and it wasn't testing the wall. I think it was letting me know it was there. The whole barn frame carried it down to me through the beams. Marigold pushed, and I heard myself get louder, and what came out of me wasn't a prayer. I recited the milking order, all 40 cows, stanchion by stanchion, starting with church at the front of the barn and going stall by stall toward the back. My voice shook so hard the names came out in pieces, but they came out, and I kept them coming, because it was the one thing I knew by heart, start to finish. Calves come all in a rush at the end, so there she was, a wet heifer calf in the straw all of a sudden, and Marigold turned around and began to lick her baby. The calf sneezed and shook her little ears. The rest of the barn was quiet. I didn't even know when the footsteps and knocking stopped. I lay in the straw with my back against the boards and listened, and a ways off, headed up the valley, the fence sang once more, far away. Moments later, the crickets came back, just a few at first, and eventually all of them. About 20 minutes after that, light swung across the barn windows, headlights in the yard, and I heard the truck doors. I heard my grandfather shout my name. He sounded worried, the closest to scared I'd ever heard him, but not actually there. And I'm sure it's because he found a dead dark house and an unbarred kitchen door. When he got to the barn door and his flashlight found me, sitting in the straw in his coat with Marigold and a live calf, the relief and fear went across his face at the same time. He came in the stall and looked the calf over, then at Marigold. After that, he looked at me. Whatever he saw on my face, I think he knew then, as he asked only one question. "How close did it get?" "The wall," I told him. My grandfather sat down in the straw next to me, at 74 years old in his church pants, and he put his arm around me. He had never done that before. We sat there against the boards together while Grandma stood in the doorway holding Duke by the collar. Nobody said a word about the promise I'd broken, that night or ever. Grandpa stayed in the barn until morning. I was inside, watching him from the window when I could. Grandma would not let me stay out there, and after the power came back around midnight, the yard light came on. There was my grandpa, setting a kitchen chair inside the open barn door with the radio going louder than usual. He had the coffee can on the floor beside him, and he sat there till dawn. The next morning, over breakfast, he talked more than I've ever heard him talk before or since. He didn't have answers. Nobody in that valley had answers to this. Just the stories that had been handed down to him. His granddad's granddad had made the arrangement his first summer on the claim, after a winter he wouldn't describe at his own kitchen table, and the survey stone was already old in that corner when he did it. There had been hay standing for it every fall since, and each son got told at 18, or whenever the farm passed. He'd seen it 4 times in his life, every time in a dry August, and his father had told him the dry years were when respect mattered most. Because, and this was when Grandpa word for word said, "A dry year, everything comes down to the creek." Grandma sat through all of it with her coffee and for once did not mock and did not argue. At the end, she got up and squeezed my shoulder on her way to the sink. I heard her tell the window, "Well, I still say only a man could do what was done to Vernon Williams. But you'll notice I never once swept up your grandfather's salt." 2 days later, Grandpa hitched up the haybine, driving it across the dry run, and cut the back 40. September 5th, the second cutting, 2 months late. He cut it alone and he raked and baled it. But he didn't sell it, and he didn't feed it. Instead, he hauled every bale of that to the top corner and stacked them by that survey stone, a neat square stack like a little house, and left them there. It was the rent, but more like the rent laid out on the table and pushed towards the person it was meant for. When my mom's car came up the driveway that Saturday, the stack was the last thing I saw of the back 40, sitting there in the corner by the trees. The calf, by the way, We named her Storm, breaking about 4 generations of flower naming tradition. And Grandma allowed it because, she said, I'd earned 1 vote and I'd wasted it on that. I went back every summer through college, and it all held. Duke lived to be 14 and never crossed that dry run once. Grandpa kept his rituals, his respect, another 9 years. And when his hips finally couldn't walk the fence, I walked it, with him riding the 4-wheeler alongside me, telling me which posts. I learned to pour those salt lines slow and even, pressing the salt down with my heel. Grandpa died in 2018 in his own bed, and I think that's how every farmer hopes to go. I swear half the town came. Roy Hilfiger stood at the graveside and said to me quietly, "Your grandpa really took care of things up that valley." He then shook my hand. Grandma sold the cows that spring but kept the land, leasing the fields to a cash crop operation out of Richland Center. Nice enough folks with big equipment. I was there at her kitchen table the day the young manager stopped in to ask why the field at the head of the valley was excluded from the lease. "Prime ground," he said, "just sitting there." I watched my grandmother, 80 years old then, and a skeptic her whole life, look that man in the eye and say, "That field's wet." It's not wet. And when he pushed on it, just a little, she said, "It goes to my granddaughter and she's particular." That was the first I'd heard of it. She held my eyes across the table while she said it, and I understood I was being handed the coffee can. So, the farm will be mine outright when Grandma goes. She's 88 now, and mean as ever, God-keeper. I live 2 hours away and I'm there most weekends. My husband thinks I'm sentimental about fence lines. My daughter thinks the Sunday walk with the salt can is a game her mother invented. And for now, that's fine. She's 7. There's time. The first cutting comes off that back field every June, and every June I stack it in the corner by a stone that men refused to walk to 180 years ago, and the second cutting stays standing. On August evenings, when the light goes silver and the ridges go black, I stand on that porch where my grandfather stood, and I look up the valley. Some years, some dry years, at the top of the field, the fence line has 1 post too many. I count them, and I give that extra one a nod. Then I go inside and turn on the radio. I like to think we have respect for one another, it and I. Well, that story wasn't all that scary. Sometimes your rural neighbors might be tall and thin and pale, and they just want to come over to see if your new calf is doing okay in the middle of a thunderstorm in the middle of the dark. Nothing crazy about that. And obviously he was anxious because he knocked 3 times and left. Can't blame the guy. That's what I'm gonna believe so that I can sleep tonight. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can support the show by listening on Erie.fm. Sign up to be a premium member there, and unlock bonus stories, members-only shows, and premium-only audiobooks, and more. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. If you are looking for a story to make you scared of the dark again, to enrage you even, or to make you cry, this story might accomplish all 3. It was sent to me from a user named Crayola Commander, and is titled Marines vs. Skinwalker. If our boys in the military didn't have it rough enough, apparently sometimes they might come face to face with something that simply should not exist. A true story or otherwise. I'll let you be the judge.
I got stuck with checkpoint duty after I screwed up my knee. It wasn't in combat, not doing anything heroic. I actually stepped in a hole during a night training exercise at 29 Palms. I felt something pop and spent the next 6 weeks on light duty, while the docs decided whether to med-sep me or let me finish my contract. They decided I could stay. Lucky me. But I couldn't do full infantry workload anymore. So they sent me to babysit a road in the middle of nowhere. It's called Marine Corps Air Station Yuma. But we weren't anywhere near Yuma. We were 40 miles out at the edge of the Barry M. Goldwater Range, where they drop bombs and shoot missiles, and generally blow the crap out of the desert. Our job was manning Checkpoint 7 Delta, a glorified guard shack at the access road, making sure civilians didn't wander onto the range, getting themselves vaporized. 4 of us rotated 72-hour shifts, 3 days out there, 4 days back at the main base. It beat getting kicked out, but Christ, it was boring. The checkpoint was a single-story cinder block building, painted the same tan as everything else in Arizona. There was an office with radio and security monitors. The bunk room had 4 racks, and the bathroom always smelled like bleach and piss simultaneously. We had a kitchenette with a microwave and coffee maker that got us more use than any piece of equipment in the Marine Corps. The generator out back hummed constantly. The nearest town was 30 miles south. The nearest anything was the horizon. Sergeant First Class Lawrence Dupree ran our little operation. 31 years old, career Marine. A black man from Louisiana who'd grown up with a Vietnam vet father and inherited that old-school military bearing. Everything by the book. His uniform was always pressed, even in the middle of the desert. We had to do radio checks every 4 hours exactly, and perimeter walks on schedule. He slept normal hours unless something happened, which it never did, and we 3 junior enlisted split the night watches. Lance Corporal Anthony Bautista made it bearable. He was 22, a Filipino kid from San Diego, and a machine gunner before they stuck him here with us. He was a funny guy, always doing impressions and always had some comic book crap to talk about. I'd known guys like him before, the ones who stayed funny because the alternative was letting everyone see they were drowning. He'd just extended his contract, even though he talked constantly about getting out. I never asked why. Sometimes you just don't in the Marines. Private First Class Michael Oshido was the new guy. 20 years old, Japanese-American, grew up in Nevada near some of the reservations. He was quiet and serious. He would read paperback novels during his downtime, usually something dense and philosophical. His dad had been a Marine too, but had killed himself when Oshido was 16. Nobody talked about it, but it was in his service record, and word gets around. He always looked like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Back then, I was Corporal Vincent Restrepo. I was 24, a Colombian American from Miami, 3rd year in. I kept my head down and did my job, writing letters to my girlfriend back home, and I hoped this checkpoint gig would be temporary enough that I could make sergeant before my enlistment was up. It was sometime in fall when we started. The desert nights were finally cooling off, dropping into the 50s. Better than the 100 and teens of summer, but you still felt exposed out there, like the emptiness could swallow you if you weren't careful. At 2000, the night rotation would start. 3 of us split it, from 2000 to midnight, from midnight to 0400, and 0400 to 0800. 4 hours on, 8 hours off, round and round. Dupree slept through unless something needed his attention. The watch itself was really nothing. Sit in the office, monitor cameras, 2 pointing at the road, 1 at the gate, and 1 at our vehicle. We would check the perimeter every hour, and we had to stay awake. Most guys brought books or magazines. Bautista drew in a sketchbook. Oshido just sat there thinking, which seemed worse to me. First rotation was smooth. Too smooth. 3 days of absolute nothing. Bautista, though, kept us entertained. The second night after dinner, he did an impression of our company gunnery sergeant that had us all dying. Restrepo, he puffed out his chest, deepened his voice, nailed Gunny Harara's accent perfectly. You think your knee is an excuse? My grandmother had 2 knee replacement and she still ran a faster PFT than you. Even Dupree cracked a smile. Belay that crap, Bautista. Roger that, Sergeant. Bautista grinned, then shifted into our battalion commander. Marines, I want to talk to you about the importance of proper footwear. Bautista. Aye, Sergeant. But he was already doing his impression of Oshido after that, hunched over a book, deadly serious, and Oshido himself was trying not to laugh. It was good, normal, the kind of ball-busting that makes 72 hours in the middle of nowhere more tolerable. Then Oshido asked a question. We were sitting outside after dark, smoking. Dupree didn't smoke, but he let us as long as we policed our butts. The stars were ridiculous out there. No light pollution, just the Milky Way smeared across the sky, like someone had spilled actual milk. Anyone heard stories about this area? Oshido's voice was quiet. Bautista blew some smoke. What kind of stories? Just stories. Things people say about the desert. Dupree straightened in his chair. We're here to do a job, not tell ghost stories. I'm just asking, Sergeant. Well, don't. Dupree stood, crushing his water bottle. We maintain security, we follow procedures, and we don't start spreading bullcrap that makes people jumpy. Clear? Clear, Sergeant. Dupree went inside. Bautista hardly waited 30 seconds. So what kind of stories? Oshido shook his head. Nothing. Never mind. But I saw him looking out at the desert, into the dark, and I wondered what he'd been about to say. Night 2. I had the midnight 2:0400 watch. The witching hours, the dead hours, when your body knows you should be sleeping, and everything gets weird and slow. I was sitting in the office, barely awake, reading a Tom Clancy paperback I'd read twice before. All I could hear at the time was the generator and the occasional crackle of the radio. The security monitor showed nothing but empty desert in grainy black and white. It was calm, until I heard footsteps. They were outside, on the gravel. I put the book down and listened. Footsteps for sure, very slow, trying to sound sneaky. They crunched across the gravel perimeter around the building. I grabbed a torch and my rifle. We kept them condition 3, no round chambered, but I could rack it quick enough if needed. I then went over to the door. I opened it quick, my light up. What I saw was empty desert and a barren road. The motion sensor light on the north side of the building was on, though, casting one pathetic circle of yellow light. I walked the perimeter, checking everything. The gravel had been disturbed, but then again, it always was. Wind, our boots, it was impossible to tell. The motion sensor light clicked off. Then it clicked back on. I then walked to the north side. The sensor was mounted 8 feet up. It was supposed to trigger on anything bigger than a rabbit within 20 feet. There, I found tracks in the dust at the edge of the gravel. Coyote probably, I thought. A 4-pad print with visible claws. But it was big. Must have been one hell of a coyote, I thought. They were the size of my boot print, I swear. Curious, I followed them with my torch. They headed out into the desert, clear as day in the dust. And then they just sort of faded away. Had the wind swept them away out here? I stood there for a full minute, sweeping my light across the empty desert. I couldn't find any more of them. I went back inside and locked the door, checking the security monitors. There was nothing on the cameras, except some static, which was weird. They didn't usually have static. I rewound the footage and checked. Sure enough, the static began to appear right around the time I'd heard the footsteps. I sat there and thought, okay then. The following night, Bautista had the 0400 to 0800. I was in my rack when I heard him moving around the office, probably making coffee. The sun would be coming up soon, and Dupree would be awake by 0630 to start the day's routine. But then I heard Bautista say something. What the hell? I got up. Oshido was already sitting up in his rack, always a light sleeper. Bautista was standing at the front door. It was open, and he was staring at it. What's wrong? I asked. He pointed at the door. Claw marks in the dust on the door. Like a big dog had been pawing at it, causing marks and smears in the dust. Did you hear anything? I asked. I heard scratching. I thought it was one of you guys screwing with me. I opened the door to tell you to knock it off. He looked at me. Restrepo, these weren't here earlier. I examined the claw marks. 4 parallel grooves, each about an inch apart. On closer inspection, they actually dug into the metal a bit, enough that you could catch your fingernail in it. The hell? Bautista said. I looked up. He was staring at the top of the door, about 6 feet up, because there were more scratch marks there, dragging downward. Dupree came out in his PT shorts and t-shirt and saw us standing there. Then he saw the door. The hell is this? I don't know, Sergeant, Bautista said. I heard scratching, opened up, and found this. Dupree inspected the marks himself. I could see his jaw tighten. Probably a bobcat or coyote. Sergeant, Bautista pointed. These are 6 feet up the door. Dupree paused and thought for a moment. Maybe vandals, he finally said. Before we started this rotation, focus on the mission. I'll report it to facilities maintenance. He went back inside. Bautista and I looked at each other. They weren't there yesterday, he said quietly. I did my perimeter walk at 0500. I would have seen it. I know. So what the heck did that? I didn't have an answer for him. The last day of the rotation, we loaded into the Humvee for the drive back to main base. Dupree drove, and I sat passenger. Bautista and Oshido in back. I think we were all tired. None of us talked much. And after 72 hours of nothing but each other's company, I think we were all ready for some space. About 20 miles out, Oshido spoke up from the back. Corporal Restrepo, did anything feel wrong out there to you? I glanced back at him. Wrong how? Just wrong. Off. Dupree's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but he didn't say anything. I thought about the fading tracks and the feeling of being watched. A little bit, I admitted. Why? Oshido was quiet for a moment. My dad used to tell me about things in the desert when I was a kid. What kind of things? Bautista asked. Things whose names you can't say. It's taboo to even discuss in Navajo culture. Talking about them and naming them, it's supposed to draw them closer to you. Them who? Bautista was leaning forward now. Oshido looked out the window at the desert rolling past. Well, white people call them skinwalkers. The Navajo call them something else, but I'm not supposed to say it. They're witches who wear animal skins. They can change shape, mimic voices, They're attracted to places where bad things happen, where death happens. We're at a bombing range, I said. Things die out here all the time. Yeah. Dupree spoke up. That's enough. I don't want to hear any more of this crap. We're Marines, not a bunch of superstitious. My dad saw one, Oshido said quietly, when he was stationed at 29 Palms. He told me about it one time, right before he died. He said what he saw looked like a coyote at first, but it didn't move like a coyote, and it looked at him wrong, and it followed his unit for 3 days during a training op. Said he even heard it mimicking his sergeant's voice one night, calling to him from outside the tent. The Humvee was quiet, except for the engine and the tires on asphalt. Did anything happen? I asked. One of his Marines disappeared during a night patrol. They found him 2 days later, 15 miles from where he'd vanished. But the thing is, he didn't remember a thing. Just kept saying something followed him. Oh, Christ, Bautista muttered. I don't want to hear any more of this, Dupree said, louder this time. We've got 3 more rotations scheduled. I'll not have my Marines getting worked up over folklore and bullcrap. Is that clear? Clear, Sergeant, Oshido said. But Bautista was looking at me, and I was looking at Oshido. We were all thinking about the tracks that stopped in the middle of nowhere, and those scratches 6 feet up a metal door, and about that feeling of being watched from the dark. Great, Bautista said, trying to make it sound like a joke and failing. We're stationed at a haunted checkpoint, freaking perfect. Nobody laughed. When we got back to the base, I went straight to my barracks room, wrote a letter to my girlfriend. I told her everything was fine, boring, and safe. I didn't mention the other stuff yet. I sealed the letter, put it in the outgoing mail, and tried not to think about the fact that in 4 days, we had to go back out there. Back out to the desert. The 4 days back at base should have been normal. PT at 0600 and chow hall 3 times a day. The usual Marine Corps bullcrap of standing by to stand by. I caught up on sleep, thank God, did my laundry, went to the PX for cigarettes and energy drinks. Normal garrison life, that good kind of boring. But still, something had changed. Bautista. He still joked around and still did his impressions during chow. I mean, he really nailed our company commander's speech about vehicle maintenance so perfectly that half the guys in the chow hall were dying. But I caught him staring at nothing sometimes, just sitting on his rack between PT and chow, looking at the wall with an empty expression. When I asked if he was good, he would snap back to himself and grin. Yeah, man, just thinking about all the fun we're gonna have at guard duty. But when he grinned, it didn't reach his eyes. Mail call came on day 3. I got a letter from my girlfriend. News about her job and her roommate drama, and how much she missed me. I read it twice, trying to feel something other than the distance between Florida and Arizona. Bautista got a letter too. I saw him read it. Then I watched him fold it carefully into his pocket. He didn't say what it was about, and I had no right to ask. You learn not to pry in the Marine Corps. Everyone's carrying something, after all. Oshido spent most of the time off reading in the base library, dense philosophy books about the nature of evil. When I asked about it, he shrugged. Trying to understand things, he said, and I didn't push it. Dupree ran us through vehicle maintenance and weapons cleaning, keeping us busy, and he kept us sharp. Professional as always. But even he seemed quieter than usual. Less barking, more watching. When the duty roster came through for our second rotation at checkpoint 7 Delta, I noticed we were all moving a little slower than normal. Nobody said much, but I could feel it. A low-grade sort of dread. Like going back to a house where something bad happened. You can't name it, and you can't point to any one thing, but your body knows. Dupree caught us hesitating while loading the Humvee. "The hell is wrong with you all? Acting like I'm sending you to Fallujah. It's guard duty in the desert. Unscrew yourselves and load up." We loaded up, and we drove out. The desert looked the same as always. Empty, tan, and endless. The checkpoint sat there waiting for us like it had never been abandoned. Generators still running from the last shift rotation that had covered the gap. Basically, everything was exactly as we left it. Except it didn't feel the same this time. Colder, but not in a temperature kind of way, if that makes sense. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I had the midnight 20400 watch and spent most of the time staring at the security monitors, seeing nothing but empty desert and the occasional moth fluttering past cameras. No footsteps this time, no motion sensor activations. Even so, it felt like I was waiting for something to happen. I had to remind myself that was kind of the job description here. I kept the radio volume up just to have some background noise, letting the static hiss fill the office so I wasn't so alone feeling. The second night was the same thing. Bautista didn't report anything on his watch. Oshido reported nothing on his. We went through the motions, perimeter checks, radio checks, vehicle inspection, and then it came on night 3. Oshido had the midnight 20400 watch. I woke up around 0200. I had to piss, and I heard him in the office. I heard the coffee maker gurgling. Typical. I used the head, thought about going back to sleep then, and decided to grab some coffee for myself. I had 4 hours until my watch, and I was restless. Might as well be awake. I was pouring coffee when Oshido came back from his perimeter walk, but his face was pale. Even in the weak light from the office desk lamp, I could tell. His hands were shaking enough that I could see it when he set his torch down. "Restrepo," he said quietly. "I need you to come outside with me." "What's wrong?" "I saw it." His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "I freaking saw it." I grabbed my rifle and light and followed him out. The desert night was cold and clear, stars everywhere, huge empty sky. Oshido led me to the north side of the checkpoint, where the floodlights created a boundary between our little island of light and the massive darkness beyond. "There," he pointed. "About 50 yards out. I was doing the perimeter walk, and I saw something at the edge of the light range." "What was it?" "I thought it was a coyote at first." He looked at me. "And then it stood up. Restrepo, it stood up like a person. It was perfectly still after, watching the checkpoint, looking at me." "How long did this happen?" "Maybe 30 seconds. It was so tall, man, but it was definitely canine-shaped. The head, the body. Eventually, it dropped to all fours and took off." We walked down to where he'd seen it. The ground was hard-packed dirt and rock. Not great for tracks, but we did find some. And what you're about to hear from me is the absolute truth. They started like normal coyote prints, like the ones I found in the first rotation. They headed towards the checkpoint, but they began to space out, lengthened. Whatever had made them had started to run, but it changed from 4-legged prints to 2 legs. I swear,
It was almost human, but not entirely. The tracks were narrow and long, claw marks at the front. They ran for maybe 20 feet, then shifted back to 4 legs, then disappeared into the rocks. I crouched down, tracing one of the 2-legged prints with my light. There were 5 toes, definitely, and clawed. But the stride length was wrong, and the depth was wrong. Whatever made these was heavy and fast, and moving in ways that didn't make sense. "You seeing this?" Oshido's voice was tight. Yeah, I'm seeing it." We followed the tracks as far as we could, but they faded again into rocky ground, and we lost them. The desert stretched out in every direction, dark and empty and full of places for things to hide. I kept my rifle at low ready, my finger near the trigger guard, scanning the dark like we were on patrol in hostile territory. Because that's what it was starting to feel like. Hostile territory. Something out here was watching us and testing us. We soon went back inside. Oshido made more coffee with hands that were still shaking. I sat across from him in the office, chatting about theories, calming down with talk about philosophy, until the sun began to come up. Morning came and Dupree woke up for the day. He found us both sitting there, both awake and armed. He knew immediately something was wrong. "Report." Oshido told him everything, even the stuff that sounded crazy to him. Bautista came out of the bunk room halfway through, still in his PT shorts, listening with sleep-heavy eyes that got progressively wider. When Oshido finished, Dupree stood up, grabbed his own flashlight, and headed for the door. "Show me," he said. We took him to the tracks before the sun could erase them. Dawn light was better for seeing details. The prints were clear and undeniable. 4 legs to 2, then back again. Dupree crouched down, examining them like he was looking for an explanation that made sense. Any explanation. "Could be anything," he finally said. "Maybe illegals passing through, someone wearing strange boots trying to confuse their trail." "Sarge," Bautista said, "just look at them. Look at the spacing on this, and how deep they are. Why would someone come out here to trick us? The tracks don't make sense, I admit that, but neither do your explanations." "Could be anything," Dupree repeated, but he was staring at the 2-legged prints, at the tipped points with claws. I could tell his mind was really going. He stood up then and brushed dirt off his hands. "I can report it to base. Possible trespasser, tracks found. We document this, but we stay alert." He made the radio call at 0800 during the scheduled check-in, kept it professional and vague. "Checkpoint 7 Delta to base. Be advised we found tracks indicating possible trespasser activity in the area. Continuing to monitor. No visual confirmation of personnel. Over." The response came back bored and staticky. "Copy 7 Delta. Remain vigilant. Report any confirmed sightings. Out." That was that. The base didn't care, but they didn't really have a reason to yet. All they had to go on so far were some tracks in the desert. Probably nothing to them. Except all of us knew it wasn't nothing. On night 5, Bautista had the 0400 to 0800 watch. I was in deep sleep when he shook me awake. It was urgent, but not panicked. The sky outside was starting to lighten, maybe 0615 or 0630. "Restrepo, get up. Something happened." I sat up, instantly alert. "What?" "I heard Dupree's voice, outside, calling for me." That woke me up completely. "When?" "Like 10 minutes ago. I was making coffee in the kitchenette, and I heard him clear as day." He said, "Bautista, come here real quick." It sounded exactly like him, man.
His voice, his cadence, everything. So I went to check if he needed something and went to the bunk room. Bautista's eyes went wide. But there he was, asleep, Restrepo. Dead asleep. I woke him up too, and he said he hadn't been outside all night. And then he chewed me out. Dupree was already up, pulling on his boots and checking his rifle. Both of you, outside with me, now. We went out armed, scanning the perimeter in the early dawn light. No movement or sound so far, just wind and the usual generator noise. We walked the entire perimeter, checking every angle and every shadow, and still found nothing. It was his voice, Bautista insisted, back inside with coffee that was probably cold by now. I'm not messing with you, Sarge. It was exactly your voice. I would have bet my life it was you. Dupree sat down heavily in the office chair, setting his rifle against the desk. His face was hard to read. Part skeptical, but there was something else there. Worry, I thought. Oshiro, he called. Oshido came out, still half asleep. Tell Bautista what you told us. About the things in the desert, the native folklore. Oshido glanced at me, then at Bautista, then back to Dupree. You want me to... Tell him. So Oshido explained again. Skinwalkers, witches in animal skins, shapeshifters, mimics, things that wore the faces and voices of people you knew, things you didn't name or talk about. Bautista listened. I could tell he was getting nervous. So, you're saying that thing I heard was probably... We're not saying anything, Dupree cut him off. I'm saying there's folklore about this area, and I'm saying we need to be smarter than we've been. From now on, new rule. He looked at each of us in turn. Nobody goes outside alone at night. I don't care what you hear. I don't care who you think is calling you. You wake someone else first. You verify. You don't go out alone. Clear? Clear, Sergeant, we said in unison. And if you hear someone's voice calling you from outside, even if it sounds exactly like one of us, you verify that person's location before you respond. Do you understand what I'm telling you? We understood. Something out there could sound like one of us, could mimic us, and could call to us in voices that we trusted. I couldn't believe what I was believing. And we had 3 more days in this rotation, 3 more nights. I looked at the security monitors, at all the empty deserts surrounding our little checkpoint. It was somewhere out there, and it knew our voices. Thankfully, that rotation ended without any further incidents. The 4 days back at base after that felt different. We stuck together more, Bautista, Oshiro, and me. We'd grab chow at the same time and hit the gym together. Started doing our laundry in the same cycles. We weren't making it weird, just trying to exist in each other's orbits, like we were afraid to be alone. Like something might find us if we separated. Dupree noticed. I caught him watching us sometimes with this look. It was a good one, though. He was worried about us. I later found out he'd put in a request to get us rotated off Checkpoint 7 Delta, citing stress of isolation duty, recommending we be reassigned to normal guard rotations at the main base. The request, though, got denied within 48 hours. Due to personnel shortage, budget constraints, the usual military bullcrap that means we don't care, so deal with it. At the time, he didn't tell us about that request. It was something I found out later, after everything, when I was going through some paperwork. But I think we all sensed that he was trying. He was a hard ass, but he believed in us. even if he didn't say it out loud. Mail call on day 3 brought news. Bautista got a letter from home, and I'd never seen that man so relieved. His mother's cancer treatment was showing improvement. Tumors were shrinking, and doctors were cautiously optimistic. Not a cure and not a guarantee, but it was hope that Bautista needed. He seemed to be back to his old self after that. The version of Bautista we'd known before the checkpoint started getting into our heads. The impressions came back, and the jokes, the energy that made crappy garrison life slightly less crappy. During formation, he did a spot-on impression of our company gunny losing his mind over someone's haircut, and even the staff sergeant had to turn away to hide a smile. I caught myself thinking everything was going to be okay. Maybe we'd paid our dues out there at the checkpoint at long last, and that thing would not come back. The night before our 3rd rotation, the 3 of us grabbed chow at the E-Club. It was packed. A Friday night, payday weekend. Half the base was crammed into the small dining area. We found a table in the corner, and Bautista was in rare form, telling stories about boot camp, making me and Oshido laugh so hard I thought I'd choke on my burger. Eventually, other Marines stopped at the table, asking for different impressions and to tell that one joke again, Bautista. It was a fun time. "Man," Bautista said, after eventually catching his breath. "I know that place is screwed up, I know it, but I got you guys. We're gonna be all right." Oshido, who rarely smiled, was actually grinning. "Yeah, we got each other's backs." I raised my soda. No alcohol on the base, but the gesture was the same. "Semper Fi, you idiots." We touched cups, and someone from another table came over with his phone. "You guys mind? You look like you're having way too much fun for Marines." We posed for a picture, arms around each other's shoulders and all of us smiling. Really smiling. That was the last time I saw Bautista truly happy. Walking back to the barracks afterward, Bautista was quiet. Eventually he spoke up, casual but not too casual. "My mom said in her letter that my baby sister's birthday would have been next week. She'd have been 15. Can you believe that? The years fly by." I stopped walking. "Oh, I didn't know you had a sister, man." "Yeah," he kept walking, hands in his pockets. "She died when we were kids. She drowned in a pool at a birthday party. I was supposed to be watching her, but I was only 12. Someone thought I was old enough to do that. Even I thought so. But I got distracted, started to screw around with some older kids, showing off, trying to be cool. By the time I noticed she was gone, by the time I found her at the bottom of the pool, it was too late. They got her out, did CPR, actually got her breathing again. But the brain damage. She lasted 3 days in the hospital. Then they turned off the machines." Oshido and I had stopped walking. We didn't know what to say. "Her name was Maria," Bautista continued. "She had this laugh, man, the little kid laugh that just made everyone happy. And she always loved water. Loved swimming. That's the screwed up part. She was a good swimmer. But she dove in the deep end. She wanted to touch the bottom. And I guess she panicked or got disoriented or something." He looked up at the stars. "My parents never blamed me out loud. But I know. I know it's my fault." "Bautista," I started. "Ancient history." He shook it off. Literally shook his shoulders like he was shaking off a weight. "Anyway, let's get some rack time. Big day tomorrow." I wanted to say something to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he was just a kid and that accidents happened. But the words felt empty in my mouth, so I didn't say anything. we just walked back to the barracks and went to our racks to try to sleep. I should have said something. I should have known that kind of guilt doesn't go away. It lives with you. I should have known. The drive back to Checkpoint 7 Delta was fine. All four of us were a bit tense, despite the good mood from the night before. Dupree laid out the rules again before we even unloaded. 2-man watches at all times. No one outside alone even during daylight. Verify voices before responding to anyone. Weapons condition 1 at all times during night watches. He was treating this like a combat deployment now, not garrison guard duty. The first 48 hours were eerily quiet. We didn't hear any scratching and we didn't find any footprints. The security monitors showed nothing but empty desert. The motion sensors stayed dark. It was like the checkpoint had gone back to being just a building in the middle of nowhere. And I wished it would have stayed that way. We knew something was going to happen eventually. The fact we were still all on edge told us something. "I think it knows we're waiting," Oshiro said on the second night, both of us on watch together in the office. Bautista was in better spirits than us. Maybe it got bored and screwed off, found some other jarheads to spook. We're probably not interesting enough anymore. He said that, but he checked the corners more often than he used to, and I noticed he was sleeping with his flashlight on. And then, night 3 happened. Oshiro and I had the midnight 20400 watch. It was around 0200. Oshiro was doing a radio check with base. Pretty much a scripted but required conversation. That's when I began to hear popping sounds. Wet pops, like joints cracking, bones breaking. It made me want to gag when I heard it. It was coming from the bunk room. I looked over at Oshiro. He'd heard it too. He was already setting down the radio handset, reaching for his M4. We moved quietly toward the bunk room, weapons up and safeties off. The door was cracked open. The lights inside were off, unusual since Bautista had been sleeping with his light. The popping sounds continued, all organic sounding and messed up. I reached the doorframe, and I peered around it carefully, not wanting to give away my position. What I saw turned my blood to ice. Bautista was in his rack, lying flat on his back, eyes wide open, completely froze up. His face was locked in an expression of absolute terror, mouth slightly open, not blinking, barely breathing. The man was paralyzed because something was crouched over him on the bed. The lower half of it was coyote, somewhat. Backward bent legs covered in matted fur, paws with 2 long claws gripping the mattress. But the upper half was more humanoid, torso long and narrow with very thin arms, skin gray and slick like it was covered in mucus or pond water. It straddled Bautista's chest, crouching over him inches from his face, and its face was shifting. I watched. I couldn't move either, could barely breathe. I watched as the flesh bubbled and popped and reformed. The skull underneath seemed to be breaking and reshaping quickly, features melting like wax, then solidifying, then melting again. It cycled through a coyote's face, with an elongated snout and yellow eyes and too many teeth. Then the snout retracted, eyes moving forward and the skin smoothing. I saw a child's face emerge. A little girl, Filipino features, huge dark eyes and a sweet smile. The smile stretched wider, teeth lengthening into fangs that did not belong in a little girl's mouth. Then it laughed. High-pitched child's laughter mixed with animal yips, a sound that made my skin want to crawl right off of my body. The face shifted again, little girl features mixing with the coyote's snout, eyes going yellow, skin going gray and furred and smooth and human all at the same time. Then it morphed into Bautista. Perfect copy. His face, his features exact, down to the small scar on his chin from a training accident. The creature wearing Bautista's face grinned down at the real Bautista with his mouth.
Look at me, Tony. I'm you. I'm better at being you.
The thing spoke to him. It laughed, and I saw tears running down the real Bautista's face, his body still frozen up, unable to move or scream. The creature's left hand or claw reached towards him. I finally moved. "Get away from him!" The creature's head snapped towards me, fast. It locked eyes with me for one eternal second. Then it burst through the window in an explosion of glass and was gone. Just gone, moving too fast to track. The alarm system blared. Dupree was running from his rack, rifle up, shouting, "What happened? Report!" But Oshiro and I were staring at Bautista. He was still frozen, eyes locked on where the creature had been, body shaking violently, but otherwise completely rigid. He was locked in that moment, trapped in it. "Bautista!" Dupree was at his side, rifle lowered, checking on him. "Lance Corporal Bautista, can you hear me?" No response, even though the tears kept flowing. "Sarge," I managed. "There was something on top of him, something that was wearing his face." Before Dupree could give me that "what the hell are you talking about" look, Oshiro chimed in. "It's true, Sarge. Some sort of animal thing was on top of him, changing faces." "We're getting him out of here, now!" Dupree's voice was hard. It was hard to move Bautista. His body was rigid and locked up like rigor mortis in a living person. We finally got him into a sitting position in a chair, and we wrapped him in a blanket. "He's in shock," Oshiro said. "Severe shock." Dupree was already on the radio. "Maine, this is Checkpoint 7 Delta. We have a medical emergency. Need immediate case vac. Over." The response crackled back. They would be here in 45 minutes. And those 45 minutes lasted forever. The whole time we sat with Bautista, trying to talk to him, trying to bring him back. "Tony, man, you're okay," I said. "It's gone. We're here. You're safe." Nothing. Just a 1,000-yard stare and shaking. Oshiro examined the broken window. There was glass everywhere, but no blood. The bunk where Bautista had been showed deep indentations in the mattress where something had crouched. 4 distinct pressure points, too far apart to be human hands. When the vehicle finally arrived, the corpsman took one look at Bautista and went pale. "Christ, what happened to him?" "Possible psychological break," Dupree said. "We found him like this." They loaded Bautista up, and we watched as they drove away with our friend. "Pack it up. We're going back with him," Dupree said. "Sarge, we still have 24 hours on rotation. Do I look like I give a crap?" He rounded on me. I'd never seen him so angry before. "We're done. Pack your crap, we're leaving. That's an order." I did as he said. Bautista was in medical for 3 days. They kept him under observation in the base hospital. I visited during that time. He was sitting up in bed, staring at the wall, not moving. When I said his name, he didn't reply. He just seemed to be watching something that I couldn't see. By day 4, something changed. When Oshiro and I visited that afternoon, Bautista was sitting up, eating jello and smiling. "Hey, what's up, guys?" Like we'd just run into each other at the PX. Like nothing happened. "Tony, man, are you okay?" I couldn't keep the uncertainty out of my voice. "Yeah, dude, I'm good." He spooned more jello into his mouth. "The docs say I had some kind of panic attack or something. Embarrassing, yeah, but I'm sorry I freaked you guys out." Oshiro and I exchanged a look. "Do you remember what happened?" Bautista's smile flickered for a second. "I remember waking up and feeling like I couldn't move. That's about it. Everything else is pretty fuzzy." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Probably for the best, right?" We talked for another 20 minutes. He was so animated, so back to his old self, but I did notice his hands shook a bit when he held his water cup. And when I shifted position and my shadow fell across the window behind him, he flinched. He kept his eyes on us, on the door, anywhere but that window. From what we could gather from him, he didn't remember the creature clearly, or he was lying about it. I couldn't tell which it was, or which explanation was worse than the other. Dupree pulled me and Oshiro aside the next day. We met in his cramped office. He closed the door and gestured for us to sit. "Bautista is off checkpoint duty. Permanently." His voice left no room for argument. "I don't care what the docs clear him for. I don't care what he says. I'm putting in paperwork to keep him on base assignments only. He's not going back out there." "Good," Oshiro said quietly. "Whatever that thing is," Dupree continued, "it targeted him specifically, from what you two told me, and I want to know why." Oshiro eventually spoke. His voice was careful. "I've heard that skinwalkers can sense weakness, emotional pain. They're drawn to it like blood in the water. With his mom being sick, his sister, well, he's suffering from a lot." My stomach knotted up at the image of that thing's face twisting into a visage of a little girl. I knew then, and I knew now, that face was likely his little sister, Maria. "Christ," I muttered as I remembered. "Christ indeed," Dupree said. "So he's done. I'm not sending him back out there." Later on, I saw Bautista and Dupree together. I was walking past the company office and I saw them through the window. Bautista standing at attention, Dupree shaking his head firmly. Later, Dupree told me that Bautista had asked to come back. He wanted another shot at it. Almost sounded like he wanted to face it again. "Request denied," Dupree had told him. "You're staying on base and that's final." I saw Bautista later that day in the chow hall. He was sitting alone, pushing his food around his tray. When I sat down across from him, he looked up and smiled. "Hey, man." "Hey, you doing all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine." He took a drink of water. Instantly, I noticed the shaking was still there. "So Dupree told you he won't let me back?" "Look, it's probably for the better," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, I feel like I left something out there, you know? Like I had something to finish." "You don't owe that thing anything, Tony. And you don't owe us anything." "Maybe." He pushed his tray away. "Maybe." Dupree let us know that 4th rotation started in 2 days. We'd be getting a replacement, a PFC they called Croak. The guy was from West Virginia, named Daniel Croak. That's all Dupree really knew so far. And Dupree, Oshiro, and I agreed that we would not tell him anything about this skinwalker. Back at the checkpoint, Oshiro and I had the midnight to 0400 watch. Around 0130, we were sitting in the office. He was reading one of his philosophy books, of course. I was doing log entries. I looked up to ask him something, and I stopped. His head was slumped forward, chin to chest. The book was still in his hands, but his grip was loose. Oshiro? Nothing. Hey, Oshiro. Still nothing. This man was deeply asleep or something. I stood up and walked over, shaking his shoulder. Hey, Oshiro, wake up. His breathing was slow and deep, like he'd been drugged. This was not normal sleep. Oshiro never fell asleep on the night watch. He was the most disciplined of all of us. I shook him harder. Oshiro! He didn't even twitch. I was about to go wake Dupree when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. I grabbed my M4, moving quietly to the window. The floodlights were on, and I could see clearly. Something was walking toward the checkpoint on two legs, hunched forward, arms long, knuckles nearly dragging the ground. The lower body was Coyote, those distinctive bent legs, digitigrade stance, and a tail. The upper body was more humanoid, but everything was stretched and twisted. It moved like stop-motion animation, like it was moving in frames and not in smooth real-life motions. It stepped fully into the light, maybe 20 yards from the building. Then it stopped, straightened up, then looked directly at the window where I was standing. The face was Bautista's, but wrong. It was all meshed together, like a big fleshy ball of Play-Doh with the Coyote's features. Bautista's eyes, nose, and mouth, but a partially elongated snout and pointed ears. There was fur around the jaw and cheeks, matted and dark, and the thing was smiling. It tilted its head at me and smiled even more. And I watched as it seemed to be laughing. It waved with a clawed hand, and something inside me snapped. Rage overrode fear. I began cursing as I raised my M4, flicking the safety off, and I fired 3 rounds through that window. The glass shattered. The creature sprinted away impossibly fast, dropping to all fours, gone into the darkness in less than a second. It got what it wanted. Of course, the gunfire woke everyone. Dupree burst out of the bunk room, rifle up. "The hell are you shooting at?" Croak stumbled out behind him. "Are we under attack?" Oshiro was still slumped in his chair, and he wouldn't wake up. I started to shake him again, my ears ringing from the shots. "It was here. It had Bautista's face, and it was laughing at us." Dupree checked outside. Nothing visible, no blood or tracks either. "What are you talking about?" I explained what I'd seen carefully. Dupree looked at Oshiro, still deeply asleep despite the gunfire. "Why won't he wake up?" We tried for about 5 more minutes, and only then did Oshiro finally start to rouse. He was groggy and disoriented, like he'd been underwater. What happened?" "You fell asleep on watch." Oshiro looked alarmed. "I did? I remember sitting down and then..." He trailed off, confused, even a bit scared. "That's never happened to me before." I think I knew what had done it. That thing out there had somehow put him to sleep, so I would be alone to witness it. Why it wanted me to see, I don't know. Dupree was on the radio. talking about weapons discharge, but the situation was under control. But the voice on the other end stopped him and requested some privacy. Dupree sent us from the room. 5 minutes passed. Me, Croak, Oshido waited in the main office. But then the door opened. Dupree's face was solemn. "Pack your gear. We're going back to base now." The drive back was suffocating. Dupree gripped the steering wheel tight, white-knuckling it all the way back. We pulled onto the main base around 0700 and were immediately directed to the company office. The captain was there, looking somber like Dupree. He asked Dupree to step aside privately. Oshido and I waited outside. Through the window, I could see Dupree sitting down, putting his head in his hands. When he finally came out, his face was blank, shut down. "Restrepo, Oshido, I've got some news." He led us to an empty classroom and sat us down. Then he took a breath before he started. "I got the call at 0300. Lance Corporal Bautista was found dead in his mother's garage during leave. The police estimate time of death to be 0200 Pacific. Apparent himself while his mother was at a doctor's appointment." The room was spinning. I couldn't breathe. Oshido's voice came from far away. "It killed him. That thing killed him." "The official report says," Dupree said, "there won't be any further investigation." "It showed up as him." I was on my feet. "It wore his face. It was mocking us just now. And he was dying. Alone." That's all I could say. The creature had appeared at the exact moment Bautista had died, wearing his face, laughing with his voice, waving at me like it was all a joke. It wanted me to see, to know that it had won. Oshido was right. Skinwalkers are real. And once they know you, once you've seen them and survived, they don't forget about it. They just wait. And I won't be forgetting either. Not about it, and not about Bautista. Semper Fi, Tony. I'm sorry we couldn't save you. I'm sorry we let it steal your face.